The Budokai Tenkaichi series of games are much beloved, even years after their initial releases, with their influence still being seen today. This video is a compilation of my retrospectives covering the entirety of the Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi series. Well, at least up until Sparking Zero comes out. It will go over Budokai Tenkaichi 1, 2 and 3, along with the often forgotten Tenkaichi Tag Team, as well as Raging Blast 1 and 2. With all that out of the way, let's head all the way back to 2005 with the release of Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi. After the creation of the legendary Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3, series producer Daisuke Uchiyama was looking for a new way to expand the gaming landscape for the Dragon Ball Z franchise. During a fated conversation with his colleague Ryo Meteor, they discussed how they wanted to truly take the franchise into the third dimension, with not only the characters but also the battle stage going 3D, a Dragon Ball Z game that finally made it possible to engage in three-dimensional battles. Initially, the working title was Super Sensei Gekitoden, however this title too closely resembled those of the previous games, prompting the team to seek a way to make it stand out. They brainstormed words closely associated with Dragon Ball. The phrase shouted by Hironobu Kageyama at the end of the anime's theme song proved to be particularly memorable, leading them to incorporate it into the title, and thus the Dragon Ball Z Sparking series was born, or as it came to be known internationally, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi. Released in 2005 exclusively for the PlayStation 2, Dragon Ball Z Sparking garnered generally positive reviews upon its debut. Critics and players alike praised its innovative 3D combat system, extensive roster of characters, and faithful representation of the Dragon Ball Z universe. However, revisiting this game many years later reveals that it hasn't aged quite as gracefully as other entries in the series. While the nostalgia factor remains strong for fans, new players may find the controls more cumbersome, the camera issues more apparent, and the overall gameplay less refined compared to newer installments. The transition from a side-on fighter to a 3D arena brawler for the Dragon Ball franchise is something akin to many franchises transitioning from 2D to 3D, as in it didn't go that well. I think we can all relate to the situation of finding stuff that we're first trying out to be kind of difficult. And that's pretty much what Sparking suffers from the most. Everything is so new and it doesn't get it quite right, and it makes the whole experience feel very janky. Every aspect of the controls just don't feel quite right. Every action you take is met with a little bit of delay that makes every character feel a bit stiff to control. Dashing suffers the most from this, as the delay to start your dash means you get hit when you shouldn't, or miss your opportunity to advance on your opponent. And then at the other end, the delay in cancelling the dash will make you overshoot where you were headed, which I found to be particularly annoying, as it would often make the camera bug out and lose track of the opponent. There are just a lot of little elements that combine together that really drags down the gameplay. The learning curve for getting a handle on these controls can be quite steep. Since this is the first entry into a new series with a completely unique control scheme to anything seen in a Dragon Ball Z game so far, the tutorial is essential to get right. Well, the devs obviously didn't see it that way, as this is one of the most boring tutorials I've ever had to play through. And I say play very loosely in a sense. It reminds me a lot of those health and safety courses you have to take at a new job, where they'll shove you in front of a computer to watch some awkward videos because the people in them are clearly just some random employees that were there at the time. These not actors poorly act out scenarios that would never happen that way, because this is real life, not a scripted event. Afterwards you take a quiz to make sure you learned whatever the hell it was they were trying to convey. The tutorial is very much like that, except somehow worse because there's no quiz at the end.
What is she talking about?
The game just expects you to read through all of these and remember it all. There are no gameplay elements to make sure you can actually do the actions they're trying to explain. The best way I think to do it is to read through the basic controls and then go and play some of the story mode. The basics are enough to get you through the first couple of sagas, and then come back and do the more advanced stuff. That way you have more context as to what it is the game is trying to actually teach you. Plus it is a bloody slog reading through all this in one go. During a fight, when you lock onto an opponent, your movement becomes relative to their position, allowing you to dash directly towards them or strafe around them seamlessly. However, the lock-on function can be somewhat inconsistent. You can lock onto an opponent from quite a distance, but if you attempt to strafe around rather than engage head-on, the lock-on often breaks. This makes it challenging to maintain focus on your opponent when trying to create distance or charging up on them, often causing you to inadvertently face away from them. The combat system offers the ability to ascend, descend, and move in all directions, so you do have a considerable amount of mobility. Melee combat is quite straightforward. Consecutive attacks trigger combos, and you can alter your attacks by changing your directional input while launching them. Powering up your attacks will hit your opponents into the distance, allowing you to pursue them with follow-up attacks. Despite its apparent simplicity, the combat system does have its nuances, with many controls being contextual based on the situation. For instance, blocking functions as a defense against incoming attacks, but timing your movement left or right just as your opponent strikes can result in teleporting out of the way, allowing for a counter-attack. This layer of complexity ensures that mastering the combat system requires both and strategic input, making battles more engaging than they may first seem. This game put a surprising amount of detail into the lock-on system. It's almost like they thought that there would be more of an emphasis on searching and chasing down your opponent than there turned out to be. In the bottom right corner of the screen, there is a radar that will give you a vague idea as to where you are in reference to your opponent. Depending on what type of character you're playing and who you are facing will affect how this radar works. For example, characters like Goku and Krillin, and basically all of the Earth's fighters, are able to sense ki, so even if you don't know exactly where your opponent is, when searching there will be a faint white circle on the radar that will show you roughly where they are. For characters that rely on scouters, it works a bit different, as their opponent's exact location will always be visible on the radar, unless they get damaged enough to where their scouter breaks. Then they are shit out of luck and have to rely on their eyes. I mean, what a tragedy is that? I think that's pretty cool that they harmonized the battle damage mechanic with the radar. It's a nice little detail, and it really is the details like this that have made this series so beloved over the years. Then there is of course the androids that don't show up on the radar at all, and a few other details the lock-on systems implement. It's just a shame that none of these really make much of a difference in battle, since the camera is so atrociously bad that any form of lock-on becomes unreliable. This lock-on system deserves a better camera. The way they set it up, it almost seems like at one point the devs intended the player to be able to manually control the camera, or at the very least have more control than what we got in the finished game. The camera is honestly the worst aspect about this game. It's not like it messes up every once in a while, it's a constant struggle. It gets stuck in the environment, it often zooms in way too close so you can barely tell what is going on. At the beginning of fights, it focuses so much on your character's back that you can't even see your opponent half the time. It will also swing around your camera, which can be very disorientating.
Hello, everyone.
Do you see that? Freaking camera. Characters have their own supers and ultimates that they can perform. In this game they are called finishing and super finishing moves, but they are basically the same concept. They require ki to use, and most of them come in the form of some sort of ki blast. Characters do share some of these attacks, but there are a few that are unique to each character. These are the most powerful attacks in the game, which is reflected by the flashy animations that go along with them. Sometimes the animations can be a bit long, but for the most part they do a good job of showing off the fighting spectacle that Dragon Ball is known for, and not ruining the pace of fights. I think the biggest misstep they made with these attack animations is that with some of the more powerful characters, their finishing moves have the screen fade to white for a few seconds. The gameplay does not pause when this happens, even though it is impossible to see. This gives your AI opponent a huge advantage, since you can't tell what's going on. And this doesn't just happen when the opponent hits you with one of these attacks, this happens when you use them as well. Essentially, you get punished for using your finishing move, even when using it correctly. There is another type of attack that you can use in battles called favourite moves. Instead of consuming ki, they will use your stock of favourite gauge. The amount of stock consumed varies depending on the favourite move type performed. The favourite gauge automatically stores up over time. When it fills, you will gain a stock. You can have a max of 3 stocks at a time, and are great backup techniques when you don't have enough ki. Their direct damage is not all that great compared to finishing moves, but there are many that have buffing effects. When you have one favourite move stock and you keep charging till your ki gauge is completely filled, you will enter
Max power mode.
which sounds like a setting on a hairdryer. In the Japanese version, this mode is called which sounds like a setting on a hairdryer when you drop it in the bathtub. This mode allows you to use moves such as the Hyper Smash, that is great for knocking your opponent back and cannot be guarded against. Also well in
Max Power Mode.
You can use any attacks that consume ki as much as you want, aside from finishing or super finishing moves, because that would be way too overpowered and also way too much fun. Instead, using either of those move types will cause your character to end
Max Power Mode.
Considering this is the feature that the game is named after, it's a little bit underwhelming. While Dragon Ball Z Sparking combat may not stand out as being exceptional on its own, it deserves recognition for its role in the series' development. It provided a foundation upon which better and more refined gameplay mechanics were built. The story mode in Dragon Ball Z Sparking is called Z Battle Gate. When starting up the mode, Mr. Popo will meet you at the gate and will guide you through the story. Well, not really. He will just be in the corner of the screen when selecting which Z gate you want to enter. If you couldn't already guess, the Z gates will allow you to enter certain points in the Dragon Ball timeline and fight in some of the most iconic fights in the series, and some more of the overlooked ones too, and even some what if scenarios. Actually, there's a shit ton of what if scenarios that you can unlock in this game. Sparking has you progress through the story in an interesting way. It is both linear and non-linear at the same time. I know that doesn't make sense, but trust me, it kinda does. Each battle gate has a completion percentage, but you do not need to get 100% in order for the gate to be counted as being cleared. Instead, there are key fights within each gate that you must do to be able to progress. The game doesn't tell you outright exactly which fights these are, but if you are familiar with the source material, you will probably be able to guess. However, you will need the 100% battle gates to unlock new ones. A nice little change of pace for this particular story mode is that you have the choice between starting with the Saiyan Saga, Frieza Saga, Android Saga, or the Majin Buu Saga. This is excellent for player choice, but it also comes with a downside. It makes the difficulty curve a bit all over the place when first starting out. Despite this, I think the trade-off is well worth it, as it also has the added benefit of letting you jump around a bit if you're having trouble with some fights. This does make the story incomprehensible if you play it that way, but in all honesty, the storytelling in this game is so bad that it clearly was not the focus. At the beginning of each battle gate that you enter, there is a narration that will play, roughly explaining what is going on, and once you reach the end of the battle gate, there will be another bit of narration that acts as an epilogue. Aside from these text scrolls, there are also the interactions that you have with your opponent before and after a fight. These kind of help to clarify the plot a bit, but not in any meaningful way. They are just enough to set up the fights, and that's about it. They are so dull, and the game's presentation doesn't really do anything to alleviate the lackluster storytelling. Dragon Ball Z Sparking definitely suffers from the first game syndrome when it comes to the presentation. Even though it came out a year later than Budokai 3, it does not look as good. And yes, I do know now that this was made by completely different developers who essentially had to start from scratch. But as a kid, all I thought was, why does this look worse? Because as a kid, I worked on the logic of new equals never ever worse. Given the state of modern gaming, I was very mistaken. The most notable thing about the way Sparking looks is how thick the characters look. But not giga thick like in the Xenoverse series, where you just want to slap Vegeta in the ass, but thick like a brick. They are blocky. That is what I'm trying to convey. The animations also don't help with this blocky look, as some of the way the characters are posed and move look really stiff and rigid. It's not too noticeable during gameplay, but in the cutscenes they all look like they have sticks stuck up their asses. Some characters come out looking better than others though. I mean, Goku looks fine, but then you look at Nappa and you're like,
oh my gosh, just look at it.
The car is not perfect.
Just look at it.
Then there is Frieza, whose legs look weirdly short for his body. They just don't look right. The variety in the cutscene animations are pretty much non-existent. It's almost always just two characters standing in front of each other talking. On occasion, they might have an awkward looking skirmish, but that's about it when it comes to the cutscenes. But at least some of the Super and Ultimate attacks look really nice. Definitely more effort went into these, which I get. as the fights are the main focus of the game, because the story definitely isn't, that's for sure. Some of the fight's objectives will be just to survive until the timer runs out. I think this is an excellent way to represent battles in the series that a character didn't win without doing that annoying thing where you win in the gameplay, but then the game acts like you lost in the cutscene. It's a good compromise. Plus it allows the villains to be more foreboding, which can be a hard thing to do without making the encounter feel unfair or frustrating for the player. There is also an objective where you have to defeat your opponent with a certain attack. The attack will usually be the move that they were originally defeated with in the source material. If you do not meet the requirements but still defeat the opponent, the game will act out the victory cutscene, but the stage will not be counted as being cleared and you will not get any rewards. Even though this can be annoying sometimes, it is a way that Sparking is retelling the Dragon Ball Z story through gameplay, and I can respect that. When playing Z Battlegate, you will often have multiple fights against the same opponent, with you taking control of a different character as you are playing the fight from their perspective, such as the fights with the Cybermen in the Saiyan Saga or the Cell Jr. fights. What's great about how Sparking has structured these fights is that you can play from all of the characters' perspectives if you like, or you can just do one and the game allows you to move on to the next story segment. This is great since you don't have to fight the same opponent multiple times in a row, and you can just go back to clear up the fights later if you want. Not only does this help with the pacing of the main story campaign, as you can be as thorough or unthorough as you like, but the devs could include more fights, not worrying that it will bog down the game. Any system that gives a player more options as to how they want to play is almost always a good thing, and honestly in the past I didn't give this game the credit it truly deserves when it came to this aspect. Now a bit of this was probably just coming from me bashing on the game, but I also think some of this had to do with the way the story menu is laid out. It is a bit messy, sometimes it isn't clear as to what fights are unlocked, and it is also really easy to miss fights without realizing it. Like I was saying before, you do not need to 100% a Battlegate before you are able to move on to the next one, and a lot of the time you will not even be able to do so on your first time through. For example, in the very first Battlegate, it will take you through the Saiyan Saga, but it will stop after Goku's first fight with Vegeta. A bit of narration will play after the fight, hinting that there is more to the Battlegate. When re-entering the gate, there will be more fights unlocked, and then you will be able to 100% the Z Battlegate. Honestly, the structure is unnecessarily convoluted, but the game does make it really easy to tell when you have missed something, thanks to the achievement percentage displayed on each of the Battlegates. Fully completing Battlegates will unlock new ones, such as ones that cover the GT anime and a couple that follow the films. But the ones that I think are the most interesting are the Battlegates that cover what-if scenarios. The Revenge of the Saiyans Battlegate is a Saiyan revolt against Frieza. You get to play as multiple different Saiyans such as Bardock and Vegeta as they fight to overthrow Frieza and his army. Another really cool one is the Plan to Conquer Earth, and this one some of the most powerful villains from the series have temporarily teamed up to take out the Z Fighters. For this one you get to play as the villains. There are other what-if scenarios, but these ones are probably my favourite. After 100%ing all the Battlegates, you might still have one gate that hasn't been unlocked. This is the True World Tournament Battlegate, and can only be unlocked by wishing for it from Shenron. The Dragon Balls can be found in certain stages. As a kid, I had no idea how to find these things, as the game doesn't really explain it. While most characters are unlocked as you progress through the Z Battlegate, there are a few that you have to wish for, meaning you will have to collect 7 Dragon Balls multiple times if you want all of the characters. When Dragon Ball Z Sparking was released all the way back in 2005, it had the largest character roster in any Dragon Ball game. Of course this was trumped by Sparking Neo, and then even that was surpassed by Sparking Meteor, and it still holds that title, at least until Sparking Zero comes out. Date this video. On the surface, 90 characters seems like a lot, but as many of you already know, character transformations are counted as separate characters, and when you take away the transformations, you're left with 49 unique characters, which is still a lot of characters. For this first entry in the series, many of the characters do feel very similar to play, but there are notable differences between them, especially between the different character types. The most obvious one is the giant ape. Aside from just being massive, they cannot be grabbed or thrown and do not flinch when hit by regular sized characters. I actually think that the Sparking series has the best incarnation of the great ape fights. Yeah, they are very similar to fighting regular characters, but when compared to the lumbering apes in the Xenoverse games and the just atrocious great ape baby fight and final bout, Sparking fights are actually pretty decent. There are large characters like Broly or Trunks on steroids that do not flinch from regular characters' melee attacks, with the trade-off of being that they are a bit slower. Androids also have their own category of character, as they don't show up on the radar and their ki automatically replenishes. And then there is Majin Buu, who is kind of his own thing, with him being able to gradually recover health. Then there is Hercule, or Mr. Satan, who is so weak that none of the characters will flinch when they are hit by him. He can't even flinch when fighting against himself. Yet another example of the Sparking series going the extra mile and adding in little details for the fans. Another quirk to this game that you're probably aware of is the inability for characters to transform during battle. This is a bit of an odd choice and does make the battles feel way more limited than what had become standard to Dragon Ball games, even in 2005. It really does feel like this was a technical limitation that the devs ran into, rather than a creative choice. I have no evidence to back this up, but given how the sequels play, it seems like this is the case. You can still use techniques like the Kaioken, which kind of debunks the theory of pure technical limitations, as this technique does alter Goku's appearance and stats temporarily. However, it's important to note that the Kaioken does not change Goku's moveset or overall fighting style, unlike full transformations such as turning Super Saiyan, which would require more complex reconfiguration of the character's abilities, animation, and possibly other underlying mechanics. Again, this is just speculation on my part. One of the ways the game tries to make each character and transformation feel more distinct from one another is through the Z evolution, this game's customization system. Aside from each fighter having varying base stats, you are able to differentiate them further by equipping them with Z items. Each character has a max of 7 slots for these items, which will have varying effects on their stats. Because of the limited slots, it is impossible to max out all of a character's stats, and also with the way the system is set up, there is a hard limit as to how much you can increase an individual stat. While Z items effects do stack, it is pointless to equip Goku with plus 10 attack, since his max attack is 7. Not all characters will have all 7 slots available to customize, but luckily there is a Z item for that. The Z item equipment slot plus 1. But when you equip it, it takes up an equipment slot, so it essentially does nothing. There are also support type Z items that have more specific buffs to a character, such as increased lock-on range and stuff like that. These Z items are a bit more restrictive as not all characters can equip them. Now, how exactly do you get your hands on these Z items? Most of them are obtained through playing Z Battle Gate. Winning a battle will always get you something. While there are some items that are guaranteed for beating a certain stage, there is some RNG that you'll have to deal with, but honestly it isn't that bad. There are a few that can only be obtained in the Ultimate Battle mode, which is this game's version of the survival mode, but there are some Z items that can only be obtained through Z Fusion. You are able to fuse Z items together to make stronger versions of them. For example, you can fuse 2 plus 3 attack to make a plus 6. Not all Z items can be fused, and they must be of the same value, like you can't fuse a plus 1 health with a plus 2 to get a plus 3. You will just have to get that particular item to drop from a Battle Gate fight. This system actually makes the equipment slot plus 1 Z item make way more sense. The fusion system is also the only way you can unlock some of the characters, like fusing Super Saiyan 4 Goku with a Super Saiyan Vegeta to unlock Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. The game doesn't tell you what items you need to fuse, but if you're a fan of the series, you'll probably be able to figure them out on your own. Or, just look it up, which I definitely didn't do. I'm a real gamer. When I first played Dragon Ball Z Sparking as a kid, I remember thinking that the game was just plain bad. However, looking back now, I realise it was a crucial step in the evolution of the series. Every great franchise has to start somewhere, and Sparking was the foundational game for the now revered Dragon Ball Sparking series. Considering the challenges and limitations of the time, it wasn't bad for a first attempt. While it may not be an extraordinary game by today's standards, it laid a solid groundwork for the games that followed. Playing Sparking today offers a nostalgic glimpse into the past and made me appreciate how far the series has come. It's fascinating to see the initial concepts and ideas that would later be perfected and expanded in the sequels. Although I would never recommend this game over its successors, it's still a worthwhile play, especially for those interested in seeing the roots of this beloved series. When it comes to determining what is the best Dragon Ball Z game, Sparking Neo often comes up in the discussion. Coming out a year after the first entry, Sparking Neo took advantage of the strong foundation laid out for it. This sequel offers a more comprehensive roster, refined combat mechanics, and an expansive story mode that delves deeper into the Dragon Ball Z universe. When asked in an interview about the game's title, series producer Meteor explained that some people at the company worried adding a 2 to the sequel might deter those who hadn't played the first game, so they chose Neo instead, which pretty much just translates to sparking new, but most of us have come to know it as
Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2.
Released in late 2006, Sparking Neo arrived just as the gaming world was shifting from the 6th to the 7th generation of consoles. As a result, it wasn't just a PS2 exclusive, but it also made its way to the Nintendo Wii. The Wii version of course incorporated some motion controls, like waving the nunchuck to have your character dash, and just simple stuff like that. Now I don't hate motion controls, in fact I actually really like gyro controls for aiming, but it's hard to argue that just like waggling a controller is more effective and reliable than just pressing a button. What is great about the Wii version is that it gives you the option of using the motion controls, or you can just use a classic controller or even a GameCube controller. Some extra characters are included in the Japanese and PAL releases of the Wii version that were not in the initial release, but beyond these differences, the PS2 and Wii releases are mostly identical. One of the most striking improvements in Sparking Neo is the graphical overhaul. The previous game's blockiness, which detracted quite a bit from the visual appeal, has been significantly improved, for the most part anyway. Nappa's face still looks a bit like he got hit with Brock's drying pan. Overall though, the character models look much better, not only in how they are modelled and textured, but also in how they are posed and move. The vibrant cell shading really brings out the richness of the characters, making them pop against the backgrounds of the arenas. Each character closely reflects their anime counterparts, with a level of detail that makes them instantly recognisable. While recognising characters wasn't an issue in the first game, the extra level of polish in Sparking Neo goes a long way in adding to the game's appeal. The cell shading aesthetic is particularly notable. This visual style, characterised by bold outlines and bright colours, mimics the look of the anime pretty closely. In Sparking Neo, this technique is used to great effect, giving the game a sort of timeless quality. Even today, Sparking Neo still looks really good. The cell shading aesthetic ages exceptionally well, maintaining its appeal long after more photorealistic graphics have started to show their age. But Sparking Neo hasn't only improved in the looks department, it has also made some significant improvements in the gameplay. Some would even say that it is the best in the series. Combat in Sparking Neo is fluid and impactful, thanks to the refined fighting system paired with the improved animations. Each fighter moves with a grace and agility that reflects their unique fighting style. The animations are smooth and each attack feels weighty and powerful. The developers have ensured that every punch, kick and special move carries the appropriate impact, making the battles feel intense and satisfying. During battles, fighters take noticeable damage that is visually represented on their models. The foundational basics of the combat are pretty similar to the first game, but there are enough differences that make Sparking Neo stand out as its own thing. Right from starting up your first match, you will immediately be met with a couple of changes. The most obvious one is the complete overhaul of the HUD, which is much better at conveying key information to the player. One improvement that people don't really mention much is how the health bar works. In Sparking, every character only had one health bar to represent their HP, no matter how much health they actually had. This made it hard to gauge from a glance how powerful your opponent actually was, and sometimes it just looked like you were doing almost no damage, even when landing a super or ultimate attack. Luckily, Sparking Neo fixes this issue, with characters now sporting multiple health bars, making it way easier to tell how much health a character actually has. Plus, it is way more satisfying to land a powerful attack and to see their bar just drain away. It is also way more clearer how much ki you have and just how much you need to build up for certain attacks. The other change that you may notice at the beginning of a match is that you are able to actually move around, so you have a chance to set up for an attack before the match even begins. And when the match does begin, this is where the differences start to hit you in the face. On the surface, the combo system looks almost the same as in Sparking, but if you are paying attention, you will notice that the hit chains don't automatically end after a simple 5-hit combo. There are also more follow-ups for heavy hits like charge attacks, and that is another aspect that has seen a bit of a change. In Sparking, the charge meter would build up by landing hits, but in Sparking Neo, you're able to fully charge it by just simply using a charged attack. Does that make sense? I don't know. It was hard to word it, but you get what I mean. Sparking Neo relies a lot more on stepping when extending a combo. When an opponent is knocked back, your character can step forward and continue the combo. This small change really helps with the flow of the fights, and it isn't too difficult to perform even for a shitty player like me. As in the first game, I felt like I just couldn't get that much of a handle on following up on my attacks, but Sparking Neo made this so seamless. It also just helps that a lot of the controls have a better layout and are more responsive. Something that is really hard to show in a video, unfortunately. And sparking, when chaining together actions in a combo, you would press specific face buttons in order to perform certain attacks within the combo. While in Neo there are different attacks that you can include in your combos, they are all executed using the same button, but now the attack performed depends on where you are within the combo. Now I'm not skilled enough at these types of games to know whether this is better or worse. It's just different. I had no issue with the way it worked in the first game, and I have no issue with the way it works in this game. But in Neo you do have more options when chaining combos together, as when you step forward, depending on the character, will affect the follow-up attack they will perform. Vanishing attacks were added, which are really useful after hitting an opponent away. Max Power Mode is still in the game and is a bit more useful this time around, although some aspects of it can be annoying, like the infinite combo that you can do that lasts as long as max power lasts, and if you get caught in it from behind, there is no way to escape. It's great if you're the one doing it. Finishing and super finishing moves are still around, but they are now called Blast 2s and Ultimate Blasts. They work pretty much the same way, but there are a lot more of them this time around. The key attack animations are beautifully rendered, capturing the sheer power and intensity of these moves. Each key blast, energy wave, and super attack is accompanied by stunning visual effects that make you feel the impact. Whether it's Goku's Kamehameha or Vegeta's Final Flash, the game brings these awesome attacks to life with a level of detail and flair that is both faithful to the anime and satisfying to use. One of the major additions to the combat system is the ability to transform, fuse, and use absorptions during fights. This opens up a lot of options for how you can approach each battle. Transformations not only change a character's moveset, but also let you chain together super attacks, or Blast 2s, whatever they're called. Just so you know, if I say super attack, I mean Blast 2s. In both Sparking and Sparking Neo, there's a cooldown period before you can use your super again, even if you have enough ki. However, if you transform, the animation time counts towards this cooldown. By the time the transformation finishes, you're ready to fire off another super attack at your opponent. Transformations make the combat more dynamic, letting you maximize your damage output in creative ways. However, there is still the issue with some key attacks causing the screen to fade to white, which I don't like. I don't think they ever fix this. The gameplay doesn't pause during this, and the AI still has an advantage since you can't see. However, I will admit that this isn't as bad as in the first game, simply because the lock-on system is much better. The lock-on is more reliable because they added in an improved camera. If you watched my retrospective of the first Sparking game, you will know that I thought the camera was the worst aspect of that game, and I still do. Well, thankfully, I think the devs agreed, as they clearly put in a lot of work in improving how the camera works. One of the ways they improve the camera is by alleviating the issue caused by characters getting too close to the camera. In the first game, they would just completely block your view, and you pretty much had to fight blind until the camera decided you're allowed to see again. In Sparking Neo, characters will now go into a transparent silhouette mode, so you can still see where your character is without them obscuring the view of the opponent. The stages are also just better designed for the camera, as there is less stuff for it to get caught on. This compromise does leave some stages looking a bit empty, but during gameplay you hardly even notice, and I think the trade-off was well worth it. Team battles are a new feature in this game, and you'll find many of them in the story mode, as well as being available in the other game modes. Before each fight, you can choose the order of your team's lineup. The character you put in the first slot is the one you control at the start of the match. During the fight, you can switch between team members once the purple bar fills up. If you have the right characters on your team, you can also perform fusions. For this to work, the characters need to be on the same team, and the fusion character must already be unlocked. That would have been a cool alternative way to unlock fusions though. They didn't do it though. One of the more disappointing issues with the first game was the awful tutorial.
In the menu switch by pressing R3 button. Why?
It did a terrible job of teaching new players the mechanics of the game. It was non-interactive and a complete slog to get through. Fortunately, the tutorial in this game is a lot better, but it still does have its issues. The tutorial is set up as a training session with Vegeta, concluding with him achieving Super Saiyan status. It is quite cool that they incorporated a small story into the tutorial, which makes it a lot more enjoyable. Vegeta's stern, no-nonsense demeanour adds a bit of character to what could otherwise be a dry and tedious process.
Why don't you just go join Goku and the others?
You gotta be kidding! What good would it do me to train with weaklings and fools?
Oh, Vegeta, you need to lighten up.
This time around you do actually get to play the tutorial, which alone makes it far superior to the first game. You read through the information cards explaining the controls, and then you're loaded into a stage where you can practice said controls. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you much guidance after this. I think a good tutorial should be seamless and intuitive, guiding the player through each step and ensuring they understand the mechanics before moving on. It should provide feedback, correcting mistakes, and reinforcing correct actions. This not only helps new players get up to speed, but also makes the learning process more engaging and less frustrating. Sparky Neo's tutorial misses the mark on this one. It is a bit disjointed and offers no feedback to the player. If you're having problems with something, the game will not help you. This lack of feedback can be frustrating, especially for new players who might not be familiar with the game's mechanics. A slightly more guided and step-by-step approach would have been much more effective, I think. Not all of the tutorials are playable though. There are some techniques and mechanics that you just read through. Sometimes complex concepts or advanced techniques are better suited for a text explanation. However, for basic controls and essential gameplay mechanics, an interactive tutorial is always preferred. Despite its flaws, this tutorial is a marked improvement over its predecessor. It's more interactive and engaging, and the inclusion of Vegeta's training session adds a bit of flair. But even with a decent tutorial, Sparky Neo still has a bit of a difficulty curve issue. In fact, the discrepancy between the different difficulty settings actually can make the learning curve steeper than it needs to be. On the lowest difficulty setting 1, it's way too easy. A new player on this setting will never learn to dodge or counter properly, because half the time the AI will just do nothing. It's trivial to knock these dummies down and then they take forever to get back up.
I'm dying. Help me.
Naturally, you would pick a more difficult setting. When you switch to the medium difficulty, the AI becomes inconsistent, swinging wildly from competence to utter stupidity. One moment it's attacking and dodging with good timing, the next it's just sitting there. It's almost like a switch goes off in their head. A new player wouldn't get the challenge level necessary to drive skill progression and get familiar with the controls. This can end with new players getting absolutely wrecked in one fight and doing the wrecking in the next. The game can't decide whether to hold your hand or slap you in the face. But if you start on hard, the AI is going to go into overdrive, spamming special attacks and really giving you a moment to breathe. This is clearly meant for players who already know their way around the controls. A new player would just get wailed on. But for players that have gotten good at the game, this difficulty setting is challenging and rewarding. What the game is missing is a middle ground, where it provides challenging fights and rewarding progress, and balances it against the difficulty of mastering the controls. A balanced AI setting such as this would prevent new players from getting overwhelmed and make for a much smoother learning experience. Despite this issue, I still think Sparky Neo is one of the best games to start with when trying to get into the series. Its comprehensive story mode and wide array of characters make it a great introduction to the Dragon Ball Z universe. The game's mechanics are deep and rewarding, but the inconsistent difficulty can make it tough to learn at first. Once you get past that initial learning curve, you'll find a game that's both challenging and incredibly fun to play. And by far the most fun and my personal favourite part of the game is the story mode. The story mode in Sparky Neo, dubbed Dragon Adventure, truly lives up to its name. Among all of the games in the series, this one feels the most like an actual adventure. This is largely due to the way the story mode is structured. Instead of simply navigating through a menu, you get to fly around an actual world map. It's clear that Dragon Adventure drew a lot of inspiration from Budokai 3's Dragon Universe, but is it better? Maybe. Let's dive into how Dragon Adventure actually plays. Despite the similarities, it's far from a copy-paste job. As is typical in Dragon Ball Z games, the story is divided into sagas. When I say it like that, it makes it sound like I think this is a bad thing, but I don't. There is a reason long stories are often split into arcs or sagas. It works. In Neo there are separate sagas, but unlike Budokai 3's story mode where you select a character at the start and follow them through to the end, only seeing the story from that character's perspective, Neo has you playing as multiple characters. While I love Budokai 3's story mode, I think Neo's approach is better for story coherence. It feels way less disjointed. One of the standout features of Dragon Adventure is the freedom to explore the world map. The semi-open world aspect makes the game feel more engaging. Flying around, discovering different locations, and encountering various characters along the way adds a lot to the experience. It also offers a nice little cooldown after intense battles. It's not just about fighting, it's about the adventure, but also mostly about the fighting. Moreover, the sagas are more detailed and fleshed out. The fact that you get to fight as other characters within the saga allows for a more involved narrative, as you get to see the story unfold from different perspectives. Sparking Neo has a boatload of story content. Aside from going all the way through the Dragon Ball Z story arc, there's also all of the Dragon Ball Z films that had been released by that point. Apart from World's Strongest, that one was skipped for some reason. And also Dead Zone, that one isn't here either. So I guess my statement about all the films being represented was a lie. Although they did include the anime-only Gallic Jr. arc that everyone hated as a kid because you just wanted to see what happened with Goku. But you had to watch through this filler that goes nowhere. But what else were you going to watch? There are only 3 channels. In New Zealand, there was 3 channels. I don't know, unless you're rich and could pay for more TV. Not in my house. Dragon Ball GT is also covered in Sparking Neo, though sadly there's no dedicated saga to the original Dragon Ball series. It's a bit of a shame, but I guess it would make sense since the characters couldn't fly at that point in the story. Although they could have had Goku on the flying Nimbus though.
Stop whining.
But honestly, with the amount of content that's here, there's more than enough to keep you busy for hours. And I haven't even mentioned my personal favourites, the what if scenarios. One of the highlights of the first game was definitely the what if scenarios, complete with dedicated sagas to showcase them. Sparking Neo brings back this feature, but they're even more compelling this time around, due to the improved story presentation. It feels like you're playing out these scenarios in their entirety, rather than just selecting fights from a menu. Unfortunately, there aren't as many what-if scenarios, but they are significantly longer and more detailed than those in the first game. These scenarios don't unlock automatically. You need to defeat certain opponents with certain characters in the story mode to access them. I'm not going to say which ones. Before beginning each saga, you'll be met with some narration that sets up what is going on, and the narration sections just look plain bad. The garish gold border just does not mesh well with the character art. The character art looks fine on its own, but the overall look to these screens look like assets taken from different projects. I honestly do not know what they were thinking when they came up with this. The voice narration is really good though. It sounds like it could have been ripped straight from the anime.
Touched by the Dragon Balls.
In fact, all of the voice acting is pretty decent, but it is held back a bit by the uninspired writing and direction. The rapid pace at which the story progresses does not give the voice actors enough room to fully explore the character's emotional range. As a big fan of the Funimation voice cast, this is particularly jarring, as the anime excels at its dramatic pauses, intense emotions, and powerful voice performances that elevate the storytelling. I know that the grunting and yelling has become a bit of a meme at this point, but I think they work well within the contents of the show. The sound design of this game does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to creating a captivating atmosphere. For the first time in a while, the English release got a new set of songs, rather than just reusing the Budokai soundtrack. Some of my favourites are Capture the Dragon, Open Wings, and of course Arcadia. Some of these tracks are surprisingly subdued for a fighting game, but they work. It reminds me a lot of the approach that the Legacy of Goku series took with its music, which is severely underrated in my opinion. After the short intro to the saga, you'll be dropped into the overworld map. Flying is very straightforward. You can either fly around slow or not slow. They also allow you to control your elevation slightly for some reason, but you don't really use it. I know I keep bringing up Budokai 3 story mode, but I don't think Neo's flying feels as good. At Budokai 3 you're like, but here you're just like, they probably had to turn down the speed a bit since the overall map isn't as large. But even though it is smaller, there is actually more to do. The red squares on the map mark the main story objectives. These are the critical points you need to visit to progress through the story. It's pretty straightforward. Head to the red squares, fight the battles, and move the narrative forward. However, the game also includes yellow squares, which mark optional areas. At first, these optional areas seem promising. They usually feature a character you can talk to, offering basic tutorial information or some background context. While this can be mildly interesting at the beginning, it quickly becomes repetitive and boring, unfortunately. After the first few hours, the novelty wears off and these conversations feel more like a chore than any engaging part of the game. As you progress deeper into the game, the utility of the optional areas diminish even further. Initially, you might be checking these optional areas in hope of finding useful items or the elusive Dragon Balls. On occasion, the yellow squares do hide optional fights, which can be quite challenging. These battles are often against high level opponents and present some of the tougher fights in the story mode.
Oh no!
Struggle on, you want to see, and you'll still get.
Fucking knee! That's my knee! Damn it! Man!
The downside, you only get one shot at these fights. If you lose, you get kicked back to the overworld map and the marker for that fight disappears. It's kind of heartbreaking when this happens because you're just like, no, my experience points. I really wish the game gave you more than one attempt at these fights. I'm not that good, okay? I need practice. While these optional areas do help to create a sense of a larger, more expansive world, they often feel like pointless bloat. The intention behind them is good, they're supposed to enhance the game's immersion and give players more to do, but in practice they often fall short. The lack of clear markers to indicate what each spot contains means you end up spending a lot of time visiting locations, waiting through loading screens, only to discover there's nothing of interest there. It's not even busy work. It's nothing work, because more than often than not, there's simply nothing there. The repetition and lack of meaningful content in these optional areas can detract from the overall experience. Perhaps if there were more specific markers indicating the type of content you could find, be it an item or a challenging fight, it would make exploring these areas more rewarding and less tedious. Instead, the current system leaves you guessing and often disappointed. Another area where Sparking Nero falters is in the presentation of its story cutscenes. They are slightly better than the first game, but not by much. Most of the improvement stems from the fact that the game's character models look better overall. Despite this, the cutscene animations remain stiff and lackluster, with most scenes simply featuring two characters talking at each other. It's kind of weird because the animation in the actual gameplay is quite good, but then you switch to the cutscenes and they're just like, they've added character portraits with speech bubbles, but these portraits are lifeless and do little to convey the emotions of the characters. It kind of reminds me of how conversations are handled in Persona games, where there's nice artwork of the character that is animated to show their emotions. Wait, was Persona 3 even out at this point?
Huh?
Not really. It came out the same year, so it's not a direct comparison. But that method works because it effectively conveys emotion and the camera is usually zoomed out so the portrait is the focus. As Sparking Nero, the portrait is static for the most part and the camera is zoomed in on whoever is talking, with the character model being the one that is animated. It feels like someone saw another game using this layout and wanted to implement it, but they didn't have time to do it properly. They were on the right track though. If this had been done better, it would have improved the story presentation while keeping the game's scope manageable. The story mode is massive, with way too many cutscenes for animators to create custom animations for everything. The story in Sparking Nero is comprehensive enough to allow players to follow along even if they are not entirely familiar with the source material. This is a notable achievement considering the vast lore of the Dragon Ball universe. However, while the game does a good job of showcasing the breadth of the Dragon Ball story, it falls short in capturing the depth and allure that the original manga and anime bring to the table. The main issue lies in the writing and dialogue, which often feels stilted and lacks the charm that fans have come to love. In the manga and anime, characters are given room to grow and develop, with their personalities shining through in their interactions. In contrast, the game's storytelling can sometimes feel like a rapid-fire recreation of key plot points, missing the emotional beats that make these moments memorable. Now, this issue isn't exclusive to Sparking Nero. In fact, almost all of the Dragon Ball Z games have this issue. Honestly, Sparking Nero is actually pretty up there when it comes to like getting it. One of the challenges in adapting a beloved series like Dragon Ball into a video game format is the need to balance between staying true to the source material and creating an engaging gameplay experience. Sparking Nero leans heavily towards the latter, which is not a bad thing, but it often comes at the expense of the former. The result is a storyline that, while accurate and inclusive of major events, feels somewhat emotionless at points. For example, iconic moments such as Goku's first transformation into a Super Saiyan, the sacrifice of Vegeta against Majin Buu, and Gohan's climactic battle with Cell are all present in the game. These scenes include the same basic dialogue, but they miss the subtle character development and emotional weight that Akira Toriyama was able to include to the original works. The characters' internal struggles, their growth, and their intrinsic dynamics between them are often glossed over, making the game's story feel like a highlight reel rather than a fully fleshed out narrative. Again, Sparking Nero is not the only one guilty of this. The game's structure also contributes a bit to this feeling. Dragon Adventure Mode, while more immersive thanks to its world map and more interactions with characters, still falls into the trap with players moving from one battle to the next, with story segments often serving merely as bridges between fights rather than meaningful storytelling moments. Despite some of its shortcomings, Dragon Adventure genuinely lives up to its name, offering a structured yet entertaining experience that allows players to feel like they're embarking on an actual adventure. It far surpasses the first game's story mode and is the main reason why I think so many people think so highly of this game. Story modes are always my favourite aspects of DBZ games, and this game is no exception. But another standout feature of the second entry in the series is the character roster. Sparking Neo boasts over 129 playable characters, including transformations and fusions. When you subtract those, there are probably about 80 to 90 unique characters to choose from. A common criticism of these games is many characters feel copy-pasted, with similar movesets and mechanics. While I understand where this complaint comes from, it's a bit like saying all chess pieces feel the same if you move them one square at a time like pawns. If you play the same way with every character, they're going to feel the same. And before you say anything, I am aware that not all chess pieces can move like pawns. I'm talking to you, Joe. In Sparking Nero, every character shares the same basic rush combo. If you just spam that combo with both Broly and Berto, you'll miss the nuances that make each character unique. Broly is a powerhouse, slow but incredibly strong, while Berto is lightning fast, to the point of feeling almost unfair. The game includes many minor characters that you don't often see in other titles. It's impressive that the developers took the time to include them. Whether you're a fan of the main characters like Goku and Vegeta, or enjoy the more obscure fighters, there's something here for everyone. The transformations and fusions add another layer of complexity to the game. Each character's transformation can change their playstyle and abilities. Fusions like Vegeta and Gogeta combine the strength of two characters, creating some of the most powerful fighters in the game. This variety keeps the gameplay interesting as you can experiment with different characters and their transformations. The game also gives you the ability to customize a character through the reintroduction of Evolution Z. When you win a fight or a tournament, you'll be rewarded with some Zenny and occasionally Z items. Zenny can be used at Baba's shop, which can be accessed from the Otherworld map and the menu. Baba is always found at her palace, where she'll sell you Z items and also buy from you. Z items are crucial in this game, as they are key to leveling up your characters in the story mode. Well, technically you're leveling up the Z items themselves. Before a fight, you are given the option to enter Evolution Z, where you can equip these Z items. When you equip Z items to a character and win a fight, those items gain experience and become more powerful, which in turn boosts the characters equipped with them. It's an interesting twist to a traditional leveling system. One of the best parts about this system is that since you're leveling the Z items, not the characters, you can transfer those levels to another character, reducing the grind. I really like this system, and I wish more games would adopt it. Z Evolution hasn't changed that much, aside from the leveling aspect. Characters still have their own base stats that can be further enhanced. There are also specialized Z items, and there are a lot more of them this time around. Z Fusion is back too, and just like in the first game, you'll need to use it to unlock certain characters and obtain some of the best Z items. One of the best things about Sparking Nero is how it caters to both casual players like me and the more hardcore players. Casual players can jump in and have fun with the basic combos and flashy moves, while more dedicated players can dive deep into the mechanics, learning the strengths and weaknesses of each character. This accessibility is a significant part of the game's appeal. Dragon Ball Z Sparking Neo is a prime example of how a sequel can significantly improve upon its predecessor. This game builds on the foundation laid out by the first installment, enhancing nearly every aspect to provide a superior gameplay experience for both casual and hardcore players. You could make a convincing argument that this game is not only the best in the Sparking series, but the best Dragon Ball Z game, period. Sparking exemplifies a game with a low skill floor but a high skill ceiling. The more you play and the closer you get to mastering it, the more you appreciate its hidden gameplay complexities. Complexities that were absent in its predecessor and even some that are absent in its sequel. If you've never played a Tenkaichi game before and want to get into the series, start with this one. You'll come for the story mode, but stay for the cancels, which I still cannot do. I watched so many tutorials and I still can't do it. How the fuck do you do it?
He who loves knows it. He who loves not knows it not. No video will ever be able to fully convey why someone loves something. It's a complex emotion felt uniquely by each person, and there is no other Dragon Ball game that has the reputation of being as beloved as Sparking Meteor, or as most of us know it as, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Even when other games in the franchise have surpassed it in sales and review scores, it is still often hailed as the greatest Dragon Ball game of all time. For many, it is more than just a game. It's a cherished memory, a beloved experience that has left an indelible mark on their lives. It is held dear because it represents a time when we felt the purest joy of being immersed in the Dragon Ball universe. The respect and love that went into crafting Sparking Meteor resonates deeply with fans. This game is a testament to the power of passion and nostalgia, proving that a game's true greatness isn't measured by numbers, but by the lasting impact it leaves on its players.
All that power of love stuff seemed kinda silly, but I'm starting to respect what it can actually do. So I hate to say it. For me, there's a better path to power. It's not love. It's fury!
It's no secret that many people consider Sparking Meteor to be the greatest Dragon Ball game ever, and when asked as to why, many people will say it's because of the extensive character roster. It seems like the developers saw Pokemon and said, let's do that, but with Dragon Ball characters. Sparking Meteor has over 160 fighters to choose from, with almost all aspects of the Dragon Ball franchise represented. At least that was the case in 2007. With so many characters, it would be easy for the game to fall into the trap of having quantity over quality. Given that this is the third entry into the series, it gave the developers the opportunity to build upon what had come before, allowing for the refinement of the returning characters without the new fighters suffering, since a lot of the groundwork had already been done. Of course, not all characters are created equal, with some clear winners when it comes to brute strength. But all characters are well realised and none of them feel unfinished, and the game makes good use of them all, whether they be incorporated into the story mode or the various other game modes. If you're doing a thorough playthrough, you'll encounter all of these fighters at some point. The vast majority of the roster consists of Dragon Ball Z characters, which makes sense as it is a Dragon Ball Z game. A lot of them are returning characters from the previous titles, but there are a few new faces. Sparking Meteor is where they really embrace showcasing the characters from different eras, where we have early Goku, mid Goku and end Goku. They did have this in Sparking Neo, but not to this extent. And I experienced a bit of a false memory when it came to this aspect, as I thought it was the second game that started having like all these different Gokus, but it was actually Vegeta that was split up into multiple characters. But the different incarnations of the same character does make sense, as early Goku makes use of the Kaioken, mid Goku can gather energy for the Spirit Bomb, and end Goku has Meteor Crash as one of his blast attacks. And this is the case for many other characters like this, where they will have different movesets. One thing about the character roster that has always kind of irked me a bit is the character portraits. Like, what is up with mid Goku? He's looking off to the side at something and also looks really off model, almost like a bootleg Goku. Early Piccolo looks fine, but then end Piccolo looks like he's suffering from some sort of roid rage. There are a few just really off looking portraits. This may seem a bit nitpicky, because it is, but I find it kind of strange as so many other aspects of the game's presentation looks really good. One of my favourite things about this game is not only the vast amount of characters to choose from, but there is also a vast amount of different costumes that is also included. These are purely cosmetic and don't affect the gameplay at all, but I am very much a fashion soul kind of player and I love having different outfits to choose from. And most of these are just here for added fan service, as a lot of them go unused in the story mode. Now I could just go on and on about all these different costumes, but I don't want to bog down the video. But Sparking Meteor also includes quite a few Dragon Ball characters, which was a nice change of pace at the time, as the Budokai games couldn't decide whether or not they were worth including, with them adding in Kid Goku in Budokai 3 only to take him out for Infinite World but having him in the loading screens. Like, what the hell, make up your bloody mind? It will come as no surprise that the Dragon Ball characters are some of the weaker fighters on the roster, which canonically makes sense, but it's not just their lack of might that has them quite low on any tier list. It is also because most of the Dragon Ball characters are unable to fly by default. Now this sounds much worse than it actually is, as the characters are able to leap up into the air and dash around, but once they stop moving, they will start to gradually descend back down to the ground. So technically they are not flying. So it's not as debilitating as it first sounds. But even with that said, mobility is a very important aspect of the Sparking series, and this lack of flight can start to weigh a character down when facing off against tougher and tougher opponents. There is a way to circumvent this inconvenience though, and that is through once again the reintroduction of Evolution Z. The leveling system of the second game has been dropped entirely, which is a bit of a shame because I really like that system, but considering how the story mode works in this game, it makes sense as to why they removed it. But I'll talk more about that later on in the video. Evolution Z in this game has been altered quite a bit. There is less of a focus on pure stat increase items, instead there is more of an emphasis on how different enhancements can complement each other and suit a certain playstyle. The best part of this system is that you only need one of each Z item, and one item can be equipped to multiple characters at a time. This is such a nice quality of life feature, as in the previous game it could get quite tedious to have to constantly switch around an item between characters if you only had one or two of them. Each Z item has a value assigned to them, and as a general rule, the better the item, the more ability points it takes to equip. All characters have a maximum of 7 ability points, but you will need to invest Z points into a character to reach max. Z points are earned by pretty much doing anything in the game, so you won't struggle to find them, but they are also used in the item shop to buy Z items too, so you will need a lot of them. You will also earn actual Z items as you play the various modes as well, and honestly the best ones are earned rather than brought. However, the Flight Z item is one of the ones you can actually buy. When you equip this item to a Dragon Ball character, it will grant them the ability to fly.
I hollered at the top of my voice, in the name of Jesus, you get back up there where you belong. Oh, boy, up it went.
Which is good, but it does take up one of the slots. And this is one less slot for other items just to get up to the same amount of mobility that the rest of the cast has by default. But just because a character is underpowered doesn't mean that they aren't worth including, as the way I see it, Sparking Meteor is a Dragon Ball game that happens to be a fighting game, rather than a fighting game that happens to have Dragon Ball characters. Personally, Kid Goku is my favourite Goku to play as. He's got some really snappy and quick combos with his power pole. He also has a really cute animation where he tries to use his tail as a propeller to stay in the air. Even though I just ranted a bit about how all the Dragon Ball characters are underpowered, there is one outlier, and that is Arale. And before anyone says that Arale is a Dr. Slump character, not a Dragon Ball character, she was in the Dragon Ball anime and manga. Don't you remember that time that Goku got injured and General Blue tracked him down to Penguin Village? And then there is this really uncomfortable scene in the anime where it looks like General Blue falls in love with his boy, but then he says that he reminds him of his little brother. But it turns out that in the Japanese version, it's heavily implied that General Blue is a PDF file, if you get what I mean. I know it sounds like I'm making this up, but I swear this actually happens in the anime. I don't know what Toei Animation was thinking when they added this in.
It was the 80s.
This is not in the manga, this is just in the anime. Anyway, my point is that Arale is a Dragon Ball character and is the strongest Dragon Ball character in the game. She can break through characters' super armor, she recovers health, has all the benefits of being an android, and is quite fast. While Dragon Ball characters may have their limitations, they bring a unique charm and playstyle to the game. The flexibility of the Evolution Z system ensures every character has the potential to shine. As a side note, I'd just like to mention that in all of the Sparking games, the Z items are clearly portrayed as Potara earrings, so I like to imagine that each character is wearing like 7 earrings during a fight. Another aspect of the franchise that gets a pretty decent representation in this game are the characters from the Dragon Ball Z films. However, there is a bit of a downside to these characters, as many of them are classified as either large or giants. Large characters aren't too different from regular ones, apart from being slightly bigger and having super armor. Super armor can be annoying to face because it prevents the character with it from being flinched by regular rush attacks. This can be overcome by using charge attacks, and there are some characters and transformations like Super Saiyan 4 that can bypass super armor. Then there are giant characters, who are my least favourite to play as and to fight against. They are slow and can't be flinched by regular attacks, so most of the time the best tactic is to spam super attacks at them. Because this game includes characters from the Bardock film, The Tree of Might, and a lot of other Saiyans from the series, there are a lot of great apes. They all play relatively the same, and if there's any aspect of this game that feels like a copy-paste job, it's definitely the great apes. Raditz mullet almost makes up for it though. Not all of the film characters are a bust. Janemba, for example, is a fun character even though his first form is a giant. One of the more interesting film characters is Tapion. He's a mix between Sword Trunks and Link from Ocarina of Time. This almost seems like a reference, but since Wrath of the Dragon came out 2 years before Ocarina of Time, I think it's just a fortunate coincidence. And of course there is legendary Super Saiyan Broly, who is just plain overpowered. Finally, we cannot forget the Dragon Ball GT characters, the worst Dragon Ball anime with the best transformations. And the various transformations are a big part of what makes this game tick. I previously mentioned the inclusion of characters from different eras of the franchise, like early Goku and mid Goku, etc. Personally, my favourite transformation in the series is Super Saiyan 2. However, since Goku did not achieve this form until after the Cell Saga, mid Goku cannot transform into it. If we progress further along the timeline, we encounter Super Saiyan 4, which not even N Goku can access. Instead, this transformation is exclusive to GT Goku. This helps to add further distinction to the characters, and Goku isn't the only one like this. Sword Trunks can only turn Super Saiyan, whereas Trunks can turn Super Saiyan and Grade 3 Super Saiyan. This is not to be confused with Kid Trunks, who can only turn Super Saiyan, except not really, because he also has access to Goten's fusion, the same fusion that Goten can perform, which will be slightly different depending on what Z items you have equipped. Speaking of fusions, N Goku and Vegeta can fuse into base form Vegito or Super Saiyan Gogeta, but they are not able to fuse into Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, nor is Super Saiyan Gogeta able to transform into Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. To get Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, you need either GT Goku or Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta, who is his own separate character slot. Did you get that? Did you need clarification? I've always found it strange that there is no base GT Vegeta. There is a kind of GT Vegeta. This is actually Baby, who has taken over Vegeta's body. I feel like they should have had a base form GT Vegeta. They pretty much already have the character model done, and it would make the GT roster feel more complete. They could even have an alternate costume with him having a moustache. That would have been awesome. And yes, I do understand how stupid it sounds to be complaining about a roster feeling incomplete when the character roster has over 160 characters on it already, okay? I do understand how unreasonable this request is. Anyway, Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta can also fuse into Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, one of the most powerful characters in the game. So even though the GT roster size is relatively small in comparison, it has a significant impact on the gameplay. One aspect of this game that is displayed throughout the entirety of the character roster is showcasing all the little details from the Dragon Ball franchise. Some of the best examples of these are all of the unique animations from some truly awesome attacks. I especially love the attacks that include multiple characters, and there are even a couple that include characters that aren't even on the roster. Spopovich is accompanied by Yamu during his ultimate.
I win!
King Piccolo has his Sun Drum beat your ass. And then there is this guy who helps out Babidi. What's his name? Pew Pew? That can't be right. Plus a ton of other attacks that are seen in the show and manga. Now to some these may seem like small insignificant features, but sometimes the smallest things take up the most room in your heart. And I really do believe that all these little details when added up contribute a lot as to why this game is so beloved. When comparing all three of the Sparking games, I found that 2 and 3 are the most similar to each other. The first game is like a cousin, whereas 2 and 3 are more like siblings, both in the way they look and in the way they play. If you played a lot of Sparking Neo, those skills will transition quite smoothly over to Sparking Meteor. Even though a lot of the characters are returning, there have been some changes to their movesets and certain mechanics. Combos are performed the same way as in the second game, with you chaining together rush and strike attacks, but the attacks and when they are performed within combos have been altered for most of the roster. For instance, the rolling hammer has been added to some of the characters' standard combo set rather than being a separate attack. The combo system has been expanded, adding more strings and combos than its predecessor. Nearly every hit in the rush sequence has its own unique striking string, offering a range of possibilities for chaining attacks. These include not only standard hits, but also when tripping and knocking opponents upward, providing multiple ways to juggle and control them. The combat system has also expanded on how you can counter your opponent. This means that even if an opponent anticipates your move, you have the option to switch things up and keep the pressure on. For example, a basic rush combo can seamlessly transition into a trip combo, catching an opponent off guard and opening them up for further attacks. Alternatively, you can send an opponent airborne, setting them up for a vanishing move or powerful super attack. Or if you're on the defensive, you can perform a Z counter. There's also the Sonic Sway, a new move that is a counter to being bombarded by rush attacks. It will have your character dodge all of the oncoming rush attacks as well as draining the opponent's ki. The variety in combo options allows you to tailor your approach to each battle, experimenting with different sequences to find what works best against specific opponents. I really enjoyed this system as it helped to make each fight feel fresh and engaging. It isn't just about memorizing a few moves, it's about mastering the flow of combat and adapting on the fly. One obvious change that you'll observe no matter what character you choose to play as is the charge meter has been removed. So you'd think that the mechanic that this meter is tied to would also be removed. Well, you'll be wrong, as the charge mechanic is still fully present, but you now have to guess how much charge you have. I like to compare it to how taxes work. In the second game, it is very much how taxes work in New Zealand. The government knows how much you owe and just tells you and you pay it. The third game is like paying taxes in America, where the government knows how much you owe but won't tell you, so you have to guess, but if you guess wrong, you'll be punished for it. Although if you guess wrong on your character's charge time, it is not that big of a punishment, as it just means that your attack won't be exactly what you thought it would be, which most of the time just comes down to not pushing your opponent away as much as you thought. There are sound cues that will help with knowing how much the imaginary meter is charged, but most of it will come down to practice, as all characters have slightly different charge times. I don't really understand why they got rid of the meter. In all honesty, I didn't pay that much attention to it when first getting into the games, so it wasn't like it was intrusive or anything. Personally, I think at the very least there could have been an option to toggle it on or off. And speaking of removed HUD elements, you've probably noticed that the radar has gone missing, which seems strange given the amount of detail the previous games had when it came to how said radar works for the different character types. But then you realise that the whole searching and looking for the opponent has pretty much been removed in this game. At the start of a match, you will always be automatically locked onto your opponent, and there is no button or anything that will allow you to disengage the lock-on. Now you are able to lose lock-on by using certain moves like Solar Flare, but the game really does want you to stay locked on as much as possible. If you do manage to escape the lock-on, the AI in this game is really bad at tracking you down again. Even when playing on the hardest difficulty, it is really easy to abuse using your ultimates when the AI is not locked on. Also, without the radar, there is no longer an indicator of when you are in someone's personal space, as when in someone's personal space, you will start stepping and grabbing. This is another feature in the previous games that I didn't really pay attention to either, because after playing for a bit, you just know. It's a lot easier to intuit than the charge mechanic. Gonna be honest, I don't really miss the radar at all. These aren't the only changes to the gameplay, but they are the more major ones. For the more skilled players out there, you'll probably notice that cancels are no longer possible in this game. Personally, I've never been good enough at these types of games to use these more advanced techniques, but for those who like to delve deep into the game's mechanics, this might be a significant drawback. The story mode in Sparking Meteor, called Dragon History, takes you from the Saiyan saga through the Buu saga, including the GT saga and Dragon Ball saga. Additionally, it introduces the Special Saga, featuring battles from the Dragon Ball Z films. Unlike the linear progression of the other sagas, the Special Saga requires you to unlock fights by progressing through the other sagas. Once you have completed all the fights in each saga, the What If saga will then become available, and these are some of the best fights in the story mode. I especially love the Galaxy battle. It is the Saiyan revolt against Frieza, and it is such an epic fight, and is quite a marathon too. Some of the fights in Dragon History are quite lengthy and have multiple phases. Instead of accessing different fights from the menu, you switch between characters during a single battle, creating a more seamless and dynamic experience. This approach is perhaps the closest any Dragon Ball Z game has come to representing the iconic fights as they played out in the anime. A great example of this is in the Frieza saga, where you'll initially control Frieza in his first form as he battles the Z fighters and Vegeta before Goku arrives on Namek. As the fight progresses, prompts appear on the screen, allowing you to transition to the next phase where Frieza transforms into a second form. This process continues into the final phase where Frieza in his final form eliminates Vegeta. Most of the fights in the story mode have a similar structure, and there are often short cutscenes that play in between these phases in order to elaborate on the story, as well as add a bit of cinematic flair to the battles. Characters often exchange dialogue while fighting. These conversations help to provide more context on the events as well as convey the characters' emotions, which the story mode sorely needs, as Dragon History has a lot of gaps in its storytelling. Unlike the second game, Sparking Meteor isn't as thorough in portraying the events from the source material. While the battles included are longer and more detailed, there are fewer of them, leading to substantial gaps in the narrative. If you're not already familiar with the story, you might find it challenging to follow along. This issue extends beyond just smaller story beats between big fights, as some of the significant battles are also missing. Take the Buu saga for instance. The saga features the showdown between Majin Vegeta and Fat Buu, leading up to Vegeta's sacrifice. However, it completely skips over Fat Buu's transformation into Super Buu and his subsequent fights with Gotenks and Ultimate Gohan. The next battle after Vegeta's sacrifice has Super Buu already having absorbed both Gotenks and Gohan. There is some narration before each fight to help explain what's going on, but it falls into the trap of telling rather than showing. Also, a lot of it is just not very well written, like this one before the fight with Raccoon.
Goku arrives at planet Namek. He knows the situation and will have to fight quietly.
But why? Why does he have to fight quietly? Despite these narrative shortcomings, the dialogue exchanges during battles does attempt to bridge these gaps, adding emotional depth and context that the story mode otherwise lacks. For example, during Vegeta's sacrifice, his internal struggle and resolution are conveyed through his interactions and final moments. These snippets of dialogue do a lot to enhance the understanding of the character's motivations and feelings during key moments. However, these efforts can only do so much to cover up the missing parts of the story. Without the inclusion of certain pivotal fights and scenes, the story mode sometimes feels very disjointed. Fans of the series who are well versed in the plot will likely fill in the gaps themselves, but newcomers or casual fans might find the storytelling lacking. One of the notable issues with the story mode in Sparking Meteor is its lack of player control over the outcome of certain fights, which can be frustrating when it doesn't align with how the game wants the story to unfold. For instance, take the Vegeta vs Android 19 fight. In the manga and anime, this battle was pretty one-sided, with Vegeta dominating the android. Consequently, this fight in the game is heavily skewed in your favour, even on the hardest difficulty. It feels more like going through the motions rather than a genuine challenge. On the flip side, there are fights like Goku vs Broly, where the game forces a specific outcome by making Broly invincible in the first phase. No matter how skilled you are or how well you fight, the game has predetermined that Goku must lose this round to adhere to the script. As a clear example of the game's interactive experience clashing with the source material. The intention is to showcase the story as it appeared in the anime, but as a player you naturally want to win the fight, which can be incredibly frustrating. There are also moments in the story where the game insists on you defeating an opponent with a specific attack, typically a character's ultimate blast. This concept was a mission type in the first game, but here it becomes a prompt that the game wants you to activate. The frustrating part about this is that if you manage to perform the correct attack before the prompt appears, it just plays out as it normally would instead of the game acknowledging it as the win condition. Then, a few moments later, the prompt comes up and suddenly the exact same attack does 9999 damage. I feel like it should be flexible. If you have the skill to do it early, it should count. This issue highlights a broader challenge in story-driven fighting games, balancing accuracy to the source material with the interactive nature of gaming. On one hand, I appreciate the authenticity and accuracy of the story mode, reliving iconic moments from Dragon Ball, but on the other hand, the rigid adherence to the story can sometimes undermine your player agency and take away some of the enjoyment of these fights. Another aspect of this issue is that it can create a disjointed experience. When you're playing a game, to a certain extent, you expect your skills and strategy to determine the outcome of a scenario. But in Meteor story mode, there are some times when the outcome is already decided for you. This predetermined scripting can feel like you're essentially just biding time until you can actually start fighting proper. However, not all fights are like this, as there are a few that do have alternate endings if you defeat an opponent early, or even have a character lose when they weren't supposed to. But because it's not every fight that has this flexibility, you don't know if you should be actually really fighting or biding your time to make it to the next phase of the fight, unless you have already completed the fight or looked up a guide. I mean, it's a nice surprise when it happens, but it is so sporadic that you can never really tell intuitively when it's going to happen. I really do think that the first Sparking game did a better job at conveying what the game is expecting from a player in any given fight. However, that game could be more clear on that front because each phase of the larger battle were divided into different missions, but Sparking Meteor has made them into one large mission, and it would be a lot more awkward for the game to just flash up on the screen partway through that this phase of the battle is a survival round or whatever. Honestly, I can't even really think of a way they could make this more seamless. It's just an unfortunate consequence of having such elaborate fights. And a lot of the time, if you know the story beforehand, you can kind of guess when it is that the game expects you to win. But again, with the alternate endings, it can muddy the waters a bit, which is unfortunate because I think the alternate endings are a fantastic inclusion. But you end up with moments when you're like, why am I doing so badly when just before I was kicking ass? When in reality, it's not your skill that has gone down, it's just that AI has been given an unfair advantage because the script says they should win. Aside from the few alternative endings, there isn't much replay value in Dragon history. I really wish the developers had allowed the use of Z items within the story mode. The second game did a much better job of interweaving Evolution Z into the different modes, creating a better sense of progression. Unfortunately, Dragon history feels a bit disconnected from the rest of the game, and I think they could have fixed this by allowing players to replay the story mode with items. They could have even upped the challenge to account for these items, making each replay feel fresh. But as it stands, there isn't much reason to return after your first playthrough. Despite these issues, the game's commitment to faithfully recreating these iconic battles is commendable, even if it sometimes comes at the cost of player agency. Also, the story mode serves as an excellent introduction to the game's mechanics and characters. For new players, it provides a structured way to learn the ropes and get familiar with the diverse roster of characters. In my other videos covering the Sparking series, I didn't really talk much about the extra game modes that the games offered, and just focused on the story modes for the respective games. This is mostly because I didn't really care much about the other game modes in those games. But this is definitely not the case for Sparking Meteor, as there are a couple that I absolutely love, and one of them that I think I actually might enjoy more than the story mode. But before we go over the modes I love, let's go over the one that I hate, because it actually does affect the good stuff. And that is Sim Dragon. This mode is a slog to play through. It's a sort of RPG roguelike adventure where you have 10 days to either train, explore or rest. At the end of the 10 days, you face off against an opponent with all the health you have remaining and any items or stat buffs that you have gained. This sounds kinda interesting when you lay out the mechanics like that, but when you actually go to play it, it becomes really tedious really quickly. It has a bit of a resource management type mechanic with your health and turns, but there is a lot of RNG that can screw you over really easily. There are some mini games that you can run into while exploring, but they are basically all bad. Even if you don't really like this mode, you are kind of forced to play it because finding Bomber in this mode is how you unlock more missions for Mission 100, one of the best modes in the game. Mission 100 has 100 preset fights with their own theming, like fighting against all the girls, which I think there's like 4 of them or 5 or something. There are also some restrictions on who you can fight with as well, like defeat this team with 1 fighter, or you will have to construct a team using the destruction points system. Essentially, destruction points is a tier list where stronger characters cost more destruction points. Given you have a limited amount of destruction points to build your team in this mode, you can choose to assemble a team with more but weaker fighters or fewer with stronger fighters, but the points distribution can be a bit questionable as some of the better characters have lower destruction points than those who are worse. But this is just my opinion, and everyone has characters who they are better at playing at than others. This mode is a lot of fun, and the challenge ramps up as you progress through the missions. You'll need to complete at least 30 missions to unlock the survival mode, which I find to be a bit meh, and it's not because this mode is bad in this game. It's just that I don't really like this mode type in any game. In survival mode, you face themed survival battles that get harder after every 10 fights. Each victory replenishes one of your health bars. The battles are non-stop, with a new enemy appearing immediately after you defeat the previous one. I don't hate these battles, but they do drag on a bit too long in my opinion, plus most of the fights are super easy, with the intention of allowing players to build up some more health for the harder fights, but I just don't find them to be very engaging and they take up the majority of this mode. Also, the rewards for winning this mode are pretty pathetic. It took me 40 minutes to beat this, and this is all I get? The best mode for earning Z points is definitely Dragon World Tour, which is just the World Tournament mode, but it has a really weird and unnecessary gimmick to it. You know how in some games how there's a mechanic that you don't really like, but you kind of understand why the developers wanted to include it? Well, this is not one of those, because I have no idea why they included this time mechanic for the tournaments. Instead of just unlocking the various tournament types as you go, they only become available to play at certain times. Whenever you enter Dragon World Tour, there is a 24-hour clock that will display the time, and this is not real time, but the game's made up time. Whenever you re-enter this mode, the time will move forward an hour, and if it's the right time, a different tournament will open. Again, I genuinely do not understand why it is like this. Maybe it's to encourage players to try out the different tournaments, but if there is a specific one that you want to play, you just end up exiting and re-entering the mode until the one you want unlocks. On top of this time mechanic, the difficulty of each tournament is randomized as well. I don't really mind this part, but I still think it would be better if you could just choose. In free mode you can, but you don't get any rewards or anything, and is more for those who want to play with other players. Aside from this issue, I actually really enjoy the tournament mode in this game. There is an even 5 tournaments. An even 5? Math, what is that? There are 5 different tournaments that you can kind of not choose from. The first one being the World Tournament, which I guess you could class as the vanilla tournament. All of the fights take place on the World Martial Arts stage, so you can either win by completely depleting your opponent's health or by ring out. I have never been much of a fan of the ring out tournaments because the chance of being hit off the stage stresses me out, but if you are good at positioning and aiming your throws and strikes, you can end fights fairly quickly, or be like me and completely mess it up by running off by myself. The big world tournament can take place on any stage and is more of just a standard battle mode, but in a tournament setting, with the gimmick of the final round always being against Hercule. Since Hercule is so weak, you are pretty much guaranteed to win, and the semi-finals is more of the final boss. The Cell Games is a survival tournament, so your health does not fully replenish between rounds. Because all of the fights take place on the Cell Game stage, there are no ring outs and the final match is always against Cell. And unlike Hercule, he is actually one of the more powerful characters, so this is one of the harder tournaments on the highest difficulty. The other world tournament is very similar to the big world tournament, with the major difference of the final not always being against Hercule, and I think there is more of the roster that you can face off against. I think. I didn't really play this tournament much because I spent most of my time in the Yamcha tournament. My favourite game mode is Sparking Meteor. The premise is very simple. It is a tournament, but the character and the item loadout is randomised. It must be the Binding of Isaac player in me, where I just love a bit of randomness. The one downside to this tournament is that Yamcha is always the final opponent, but even then it is still a lot of fun. But this is coming from someone who has played through the game multiple times and is already a fan of the series. But how does this game hold up for someone who is playing it for the first time?
Thanks so much for having me, Hidden. There's always been quite a reputation around this game, but the question is, does it really hold up to all the praise when nostalgia isn't a factor? Well, since I had never played it before doing so only a week or two before writing this, I can approach the game more objectively as someone without any sentimental or nostalgic ties to it. Yet, despite being a huge DBZ fan for pretty much my whole life, I somehow totally missed out on both the second and third entries of the Budokai Tenkaichi / Sparking series. I ended up picking up Raging Blast and carrying on from there since I had jumped to the 360 at the time, so I was more than a little hyped to jump into Tenkaichi 3 for the first time after hearing about it being the best DBZ game for well over a decade now. The story mode is arguably the best of the series, featuring a stronger focus on the impact and quality of individual battles over the quantity of them like in previous entries, namely in Tenkaichi 2. This comes at the cost of player agency, since battles end up walking you through a lot of the events to replicate the battles from the anime more closely, which ends up removing the player's desire to replicate those events on their own. Sure, you can choose not to press the button, but you end up with a big button prompt on screen the whole time, and it's a little bit of an eyesore. The Dragon Tournament mode is also great, except for the whole time mechanic, which is annoying, but once you're actually in the battles, they play better than most other DBZ games I've seen. Each blow is satisfying, each super attack feels devastating and powerful, it's just great. The Ultimate Battle Mode is easily one of the most unique and experimental of the available DBZ games out there, and although it has its shortfalls like repetitive minigame mechanics and the like, I think overall it's still a lot of fun to dive into. Of course, one of the things this game is most known for is its enormous character roster. Let's be honest, this game is more like playing with your favorite Dragon Ball action figures in a digital space where you can see all of the incredible visuals happening than it is any kind of tight-knit competitive fighting game. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons this game is so fondly remembered, because it's got one of the largest selections of both maps and characters that I've ever seen. And when you're wanting to jump into a battle with some friends, play out some fun fan scenarios, or just enjoy the randomized aspect of the World Tournament mode, this is probably one of the single best games you could feasibly pick up to do so. I've played a lot of Dragon Ball games in my life, but even having missed out on this one, it's so easy for me to see why it's as renowned as it is. Even without any nostalgia about it, I have to agree that it is one of, if not the best game to pick for playing some DBZ. It's kinda like the ultimate Dragon Ball simulator. So now after playing it for myself, I can say that it's absolutely no wonder at all why so many consider this to be the very best Dragon Ball game out there.
When I play Dragon Ball games, I usually spend most of my time immersed in the story mode, as it's the mode that resonates the most with me. However, Sparking Meteor is an exception. I found myself overwhelmingly drawn to Mission 100 and the tournament mode. It's not that I don't love the story mode, on the contrary, it's probably my favourite in the series. But the core gameplay loop of Meteor's fights is just so incredibly fun. I wanted to fight to earn more Z points and upgrade as many characters as possible. I wanted to experiment with each character, to see all their attacks, and to catch all the little references the developers included. Every battle was a joy, a celebration of everything I love about Dragon Ball. The reason this game is so beloved is because you can feel the passion that was poured into it. The developers' love for Dragon Ball shines through in every aspect, and that love is contagious. The people who made this game love Dragon Ball, and the people who play it can't help but love it too. It's this profound connection that makes Tenkaichi 3 more than just a game. It's a shared experience, a testament to the enduring legacy of Dragon Ball. Every fight, every character, every meticulously crafted detail reflects a deep respect for the source material and the fans. And that's why even after countless battles, I keep coming back, because this game is a labor of love. And love is something truly special.
It is very often that main console releases of popular series overshadow the portable titles. And that is definitely the case for the Tenkaichi series. Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi Tag Team was developed by Spike for the PlayStation Portable. It came out back in 2010 with little to no fanfare. To be honest, I'd never even heard of the game until very recently. But it was the exact same with the Shin Budokai games. I'd never even heard of them, let alone played them, and they turned out to be fantastic. Handheld games by necessity are usually made with smaller teams, smaller budgets, and less marketing. This may seem like a net negative, but sometimes lesser risk allows the developers to be more experimental. This is where Tenkaichi Tag Team comes in, promising a unique twist to the Tenkaichi gameplay. But is it any good? The Tenkaichi series has never had the most user-friendly controls, and it isn't the easiest to learn. Because the PSP only has one analog stick, the controls for Tenkaichi Tag Team had to be tweaked slightly. So even those who are veterans of the series will have to learn this altered control scheme. Tenkaichi Tag Team thankfully has a tutorial. Unfortunately, it is one of the worst tutorials I have ever seen in a Dragon Ball Z game. The tutorial just consists of categories of text that you read through. Yes, the entire tutorial is text-based. There are no gameplay segments to verify that the player even understands the instructions. The most you'll get is a small screenshot of the action every now and then. But that's not even the worst of it. Remember how I said before that the handheld games usually have smaller budgets? Well, that lower budget definitely shows up when it comes to the English translation. It's translated like it was written by an alien. It shows up in many sections of the game, but it is especially noticeable in the tutorial, as it makes it kind of hard to follow. It's not so much that the translation is incorrect, as it is the manner in which the information is conveyed. It reads like a first draft. The tutorial uses a lot of jargon to explain actions, but it doesn't define what the jargon means, so it explains how to do actions with other actions that it hasn't explained how to do. Sometimes the explanation is lower down in the list, so it probably just needed to be arranged a bit. For example, it mentions union stocks and how certain moves will deplete union stocks. However, it does not explain what union stocks are or how to obtain them until over halfway through the tutorial. But then there are some mechanics that the tutorial mentions but never explains. Fortunately, this is not the only tutorial in the game. The story mode has a built-in tutorial which is much better. It does tend to front load the information, but at least you get to practice the moves right away. It only covers the fundamentals though, and if you want to delve deeper into the mechanics, you'll have to wade through this mess. So the tutorial is a big pile of poop, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the gameplay is. Tag Team's gameplay shares a lot of similarities to that of the Budokai Tenkaichi series on the PlayStation 2 and the Raging Blast series. It's more akin to the PS2 titles, and the gameplay is nowhere near as fast paced as Raging Blast 2. At first, the lack of a second analog stick made me wonder how they plan to implement all of the controls. Tag Team employs a toggle system for many actions. For example, to use a super, simply hold down the charge button and press the triangle button. The same holds true for ultimates. It works really well and is an excellent workaround. In fact, in some cases I'd say it works better. This game, as the name implies, focuses on team battles, but not the same team battles as in the previous Tenkaichi games. This time, another character will fight alongside you on the battlefield. Since this is the main focus of the game, I'm going to be talking more about the new mechanics in this video. Dragon Walker is the main game mode in Tenkaichi Tag Team. The story mode is split up into chapters that will unlock as you progress through the campaign. Selecting a chapter from the list will give you a brief overview of what is going on via text. But also there is sometimes voice narration. It's a bit inconsistent. Once again, the game is just going to be rehashing the Dragon Ball Z sagas from the start of the Saiyan saga all the way through to the end of the Buu saga. Since we've gone over these story arcs so many times, let's just skip ahead to the what if scenarios.
Unknown warrior from another planet.
This first what if scenario is set in an alternate universe where Bardock never gained the power to see the future and was never killed by Frieza. So instead of Raditz coming to Earth at the beginning of the Saiyan saga, Bardock arrives. He catches up with Goku, who is on his way to Kame House. Goku is a little bit delayed because Gohan has fallen off Nimbus, Father of the Year. Bardock and Goku get into a fight, as Bardock is annoyed that Goku has yet to destroy all life on Earth. How inconsiderate of him. Fucking lazy bastard. Not every fight will have you fighting alongside a partner. These fights are fairly standard to what you come to expect from the Tenkaichi series, but smaller. After the fight, Goku introduces Bardock to his grandson Gohan. Shocked that he has a grandson, they start to get to know each other.
Several months later,
Bardock is still on Earth, spending time with his family. Now he is the one taking Gohan to visit Kame House.
Like poetry, so if they rhyme.
When in the story mode, you'll be given a mission to complete, which is usually just to find something or to go fight someone. You will take control of the character on an overworld map. Using the analog stick, you can move them around, and there is also a dash that will allow you to move faster for a limited amount of time. There are large icons on the map that indicate where you can go. The game calls them buildings, even though half of them are clearly not buildings.
Bitch, is you blind?
Interacting with these will initiate events. While Bardock is at Kame House, Raditz arrives on Earth, wondering what the hell his father and brother have been up to. Dialogue is done through text boxes. Most of the time there is no voice acting, but sometimes there is.
First, we need to find the one who killed Raditz, and then find those Dragon Balls. Okay, Nappa, let's go have some fun.
It's a bit inconsistent. The characters do talk during fights though. The game uses the Kai voice cast for the English dub. It's quite good. My only complaint is that the audio had to be horribly compressed.
It's not as bad as I was expecting.
But that's mostly due to hardware limitations. It's not really the game's fault. Fortunately, the soundtrack is really good. Some of the best tracks are actually pretty chill. Bardock picks up Raditz's energy on his scouter, but before he can do anything, Raditz arrives at Kame House.
Where have you been, bitch?
Raditz kidnaps Goku. Fuck, what is he doing? Raditz kidnaps Gohan and gives him 1 day to get him back. And where is Goku during all this? Who knows? Instead of Bardock and Goku teaming up, Piccolo is the one to show up and help.
Let that child alone.
Because he is best dad. Now that we have another character fighting alongside us, there are a few new features added to the fighting system. Unfortunately, the game does a really bad job of explaining them. They are called W actions. So instead of being called a chase, when done in co-op, it is called a W chase combo. What does the W stand for exactly? No, I genuinely am asking what it means because I don't know. My best guess is that it stands for with your partner, as the tutorial does reuse this phrase a lot when discussing co-op actions. When you are able to use one of these actions, it will be displayed under your health bar with a button prompt. They rely on you and your partner to be kind of in sync, and your AI partner makes it really hard to reliably use any of them. Most of the time, it just feels like you're doing all of the work, and your AI partner is just spacing out in the background. That's why playing with the AI can be a bit annoying. The game does attempt to alleviate this through the use of strategy settings. When your partner is computer controlled, your partner's fighting style depends on the strategy you have set. The strategy that the CPU is set to is displayed under the health bar, and is not the CPU's difficulty setting, which is what I first thought it was. There are 3 types of strategy settings. Normal is basically do whatever. Your partner can freely switch between targets. Focus will make them target the same enemy as you, and split will have them target the opposite enemy. It feels like Tenkaichi Tag... There's such hard... Tenkaichi Tag... It feels like Tenkaichi Tag... Fuck. It feels like Tenkaichi Tag Team really could have benefited from a co-op story mode. That's what I was trying to say. God damn it. As the fighting system seems more catered towards playing with another player, as the AI just isn't up to par. Bardock and Piccolo confront Raditz in a 2v2 fight, where Raditz's partner is a Cyberman, even though Raditz did not bring Cybermen to Earth. But this is a what-if scenario, so maybe he did? Raditz is defeated, and the moral of the story is...
What do I say about this? I don't even know what's going on. It's a story about family. Ultimately, it's about family. I don't... Just say some bullshit like that.
The Saiyans arrive.
Nappa and Vegeta have arrived on Earth and planted some Cybermen. For this what-if scenario, you take on the role as one of the Cybermen. But there is another twist. He is a good Cyberman. Ooh. We have to fight off a bunch of evil Cybermen. Fuck, I keep saying the word Cyberman so many times. We have to fight off a bunch of evil Cybermen with the help of Gohan, even though he can't understand us, but somehow knows we are good. Aura Zone will let you enter battles with nearby enemies. The range increases when you hold the button down. When the button is released, all the enemies in the Aura Zone will engage in a fight. Fighting multiple enemies at once is harder, but it is faster and rewards you with bonus D points if you win. It sounds more useful than it really is, because most enemies will be flying around the map, and there is no guarantee that they will be close enough to other enemies for the ability to work. D points are this game's form of currency. They can be exchanged in the shop for D items. D items can also be obtained through playing the story and battle mode. Equipping these items will strengthen a character's stats. Each D item has an assigned value, and this cannot exceed the ability limit of a character, which can be increased further with D points. So basically you want a lot of D points, and the game hands them out for doing pretty much anything. Even the loading screen gives them to you. Oh, and I just have to mention before I forget that the menus in this game are some of the best in the Tenkaichi series. They all have really cute 2D animations playing in the background. They're just so charming. Okay, back to the Cybermen. I got so sidetracked. We defeat all the Cybermen, which is actually a bit of a pain in the ass because there are a lot of them. We fly over to Nappa and he yells at us for being a traitor.
You are a liar, a deceiver. I'll never fall for your tricks again.
We are only able to injure Nappa, and he takes out his rage on Gohan. He powers up and fires a powerful ki blast at him. We do a Piccolo and jump in front of the blast, sacrificing ourselves. Now playing as Gohan, we kick Nappa's ass. Moral of the story?
Ultimate decisive battle.
Nappa has just been defeated by Goku, and the fight between Goku and Vegeta is about to begin. Or is it? Suddenly an unexpected challenger approaches. Kui is here to get revenge on Vegeta for destroying his home planet, so he ends up teaming up with Goku for the time being. The animations during fights are ripped directly from the PS2 titles, although sometimes characters will slide into animations really awkwardly. I'd say throws are the biggest culprits for this. It just looks like the character is purposely getting into just the right position to get grabbed. Kui celebrates after defeating Vegeta, but Goku is quick to realize that Vegeta isn't quite down for the count. In the distance, Gohan and Krillin sense a powerful ki rising. Just as Goku thought, Vegeta gets back up and even more powerful than before.
I'm back, bitches!
Gohan rushes off to help his father and teams up with Kui. In the story mode, the characters are represented in a chibi style. I'm not really much of a fan of the chibi art style, but even I can admit that this looks a lot better than whatever is going on in Shin Budokai 2.
Hello. Yuck, what the fuck?
They are animated with very exaggerated actions to convey roughly, and I mean really roughly, what is going on in the moment. It's fine, it works. I get what they were going for. Again, working within limitations doesn't mean something has to be shit, and Tag Team is a great example of this. Vegeta calls his ship to make a quick getaway, but Kui won't let him escape, and he kills Vegeta, and the game moves on to the rest of the sagas, and we get to see what it would have been like if Vegeta had been killed. Except that doesn't happen, because that would be interesting. Instead, nothing really happens. Goku convinces everyone to spare both Vegeta and Kui's lives. Moral of the story is,
time is short. The 7 Dragon Balls.
after returning from the brink of death with even more power than before, Vegeta defeated the transformed Zarbon. Humiliated, both Zarbon and Dodoria attempt to restore their prestige by taking on the Ginyu Force. If they can defeat the Ginyu Force, then the Ginyu Force can't defeat Vegeta, and so then they can defeat Vegeta, because that is a much better plan than just going to defeat Vegeta. Since in a lot of the fights you'll be facing off against more than one opponent at a time, the game has a heavy reliance on the lock-on feature. A green radical will be displayed around the opponent that you are currently locked onto. All of your character's movements and attacks will be orientated around whoever you're locked onto. You can easily and quickly switch between targets using the right bumper. This makes approaching and attacking the character you want really simple. I was actually quite worried that switching between targets would be a bit finicky, but it really isn't at all. Yes, sometimes the camera will do a weird swing, but it never felt that intrusive to fights. Once they have taken out all of the members of the Force, all they have left to fight is Captain Ginyu. 2 versus 1. Yeah, that's fair. What a great way to restore your reputation. Even though they defeated the entirety of the Ginyu Force, they are reluctant to battle Vegeta. Apparently the defeat by Vegeta was a traumatic experience. The moral of the story is,
it wouldn't be gay to put a wig on a man and pretend they're a woman. How could that be gay if you were pretending they're a woman? Not that I did it.
Was that it? Where'd it go?
Frieza has achieved his final form. In the face of such amazing strength, Vegeta and the others were powerless. However, just when it seemed all hope was lost, Goku was revived, and at the same time another warrior appeared on Namek, travelling across time. His sole purpose is to see his son stand against the galactic overlord Frieza. Now you're probably wondering how Bardock managed to travel through time. Well, the thing you have to understand about that is, it is father and son versus Frieza. Honestly, most of these what if scenarios have been pretty lame so far, but this is a really cool matchup. Even though we won, Krillin still manages to get killed by Frieza. Goku is enraged by the death of his best friend, and Bardock gets to witness his son transform into a Super Saiyan. The father and son team take on Lord Frieza once again. There is a new gauge in this game called the Union Gauge. During a fight, it will automatically fill over time. It will also fill up when you perform co-op actions or when your partner is knocked out. When the Union Gauge is completely filled, it will become a Union Stock. These stocks can be used for signature skills, transforming, and Union abilities. During team battles, Union stocks are shared between you and your partner. After the battle, Bardock reveals to Goku that he is his father, and then returns to the underworld. So I guess he didn't travel through time, but was brought back to life for a day like Goku was during the Buu saga, but it said earlier that he traveled through time, and he also doesn't have a halo. The moral of the story?
There's an attack on the species by a guild of psychopaths and they must be defeated.
Number 17 and number 18, Awakened.
Android 17 and 18 have turned on their creator. They have awakened Android 16 and gone off to find Goku. Dr. Gero and Android 19 chase them down to destroy them. During certain sections of the story, you are able to switch between characters using the D-pad. This not only changes who you are controlling on the overall map, but also during fights. Before certain fights and stages, the game will also ask you to select a character. This will sometimes change the way the story plays out. Dr. Gero celebrates that all of his failed experiments have been dealt with, and congratulates Android 19 for a job well done. But 19 explains that there is still one more failed experiment to deal with. The one who's created all these defects is a defect himself. Dr. Gero gets depressed because he is just a useless failure, and he self-destructs. Thus he destroys all of his failed experiments, including himself. This got dark really quickly. The moral of the story is,
you tried your best and you failed miserably. The lesson is, never try.
A close, intense, super fierce battle.
Along with the text boxes, the game also utilizes some screenshots from the anime. It would have been cool to see some original artwork, because who doesn't enjoy seeing that? But these work well enough. They capture the essence of what is going on in a quick and efficient manner. Honestly, Tag Team does a better job than most at retelling the story of Dragon Ball Z, even with the subpar translation. This is a Broly what if scenario, and just like 99% of Broly what if scenarios, it's what if Broly killed everyone. More of the story? Please give Broly something else to do.
Farewell to the proud warrior.
Babidi magically manipulates the evil that lay in Piccolo's heart from the days he was the Demon King Piccolo and has turned him into Majin Piccolo. While his body and mind were controlled, his pride remained and Piccolo desired to fight Goku. While fighting Goku, they sense a huge key that has just appeared. It's Majin Buu. Piccolo promises to take care of Majin Buu before coming back and settling things with Goku. Meanwhile, Gohan and Dabura team up, in the hopes that they'll be strong enough to destroy Buu, but they barely can even cause a scratch, and Majin Buu kills Gohan. As you can guess, Piccolo is pissed. He rushes to Majin Buu's location and promises to take Buu to hell with him. The visual flair of supers and ultimate attacks have had a significant downgrade. The animations and camera angles are not as dynamic, they are also quite a bit shorter too. The implementation of animation for super attacks feels a bit janky, as when your teammate uses a super, it will cut to them but the whole animation doesn't play, and it just cuts back to you. It really breaks the flow of fights sometimes. I get why it does this because the game has hidden pauses when playing dynamic attack animations, and honestly it is probably better than your game just randomly pausing. I just realized that this is probably why the super and ultimate attack animations have been shortened so much. Okay, so I think they made the right decision to make the attack animation shorter, but it still doesn't change the fact that they don't look as good. But I think this is a good thing, if that makes sense. Piccolo does a Vegeta and final explosions himself, making sure there is no way for Majin Buu to regenerate. Moral of the story?
Got tomato in my sleeve.
The absolute limit, Super Saiyan 3.
Set just after Vegeta forever sleeps himself using his all-out attack on Buu, a single spaceship has arrived on Earth. The alien soldier has decided that Earth is a pretty good planet to take over.
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
Enemies will be flying around the overworld map, and you can choose to either engage with or try to avoid them. Characters can use skills while in the overworld. Depending on the skill will change the effect it has on enemies. For example, Solar Flare will stun them. Gonna be honest, I kind of forgot to use these through the majority of my playtime. These skills will drain half of your ki gauge. Ki is also used for flying faster around the map, so I much preferred using my limited ki on that. The alien soldier goes to take on Majin Buu and Super Saiyan 3 Goku by himself. He's fucked. The man who had just been declaring his rule on the universe moments earlier is now completely submissive to Goku. But there is nothing pitiful in his appearance. Rather, it seems that he has come alive. It seems that such a position is natural for this man. Moral of the story is?
A savior appears?
This what if is actually another interesting idea. What if, during the fight against Super Buu, instead of using the Batara fusion, Goku and Vegeta use the fusion dance and fuse into Gogeta? For fusions to work in this game, you must be teamed up with the right partner, so Goku and Vegeta must be paired up to fuse into Vegeto. Even if you initiate the fusion, your partner must consent to it. I really think that Tag Team missed the perfect opportunity to bring back the what if fusions. I mean, not every character could have one, that would be a lot of resources, but just a few unique fusions would have been really fun. I wonder how the fusion into Gogeta rather than Vegeta will affect the story. Well, apparently it would make no difference and the events play out the exact same way, except when Goku and Vegeta defuse, it actually makes more sense. Moral of the story? Oh gosh, my bra straps are sticking out.
Terrifying Mange Buu.
Wait. Is that not his friend?
Terrifying Majin Buu.
Remember during the Buu saga when that asshole shot the dog? Yeah, well what if he also shot Hercule, the asshole? Super Buu basically just goes on a rampage and eats everyone. I'm not joking, this is the story. He even goes after Videl, Hercule's daughter. Some friend he is. The moral of the story, don't shoot dogs, you asshole.
Battle for the universe!
Goku and Vegeta are in the sacred world of the Kais fighting Kid Buu. Graphically, Tenkaichi Tag Team is about on par with what you would expect from a PSP title. It's not bad by any means, but it's nothing spectacular either. The character models are fairly accurate to the original designs, and the texture work provides some nice extra details, such as folds in the character's clothing and volume in the hair. But when compared to the Shin Budokai games, which were released on the same hardware, there is just no comparison. The beautiful cel shading art style just translates so much better to less powerful hardware than the more realistic style of Tag Team. Although Tag Team has a few more hurdles to jump over in order to work on the PSP. For instance, the fights take place in fully 3D stages that are quite a bit larger than those seen in Shin Budokai, since that series is restricted to a 2D plane. Also, Tag Team can have up to 4 characters fighting at the same time. This is a lot more for the system to render. That's why I'm not too disappointed with how the game looks. It runs fine and is readable. All the characters have a subtle outline that helps them pop out from the background, and it really does help when the characters are really far away from the camera. Yeah, they do look like blobs, but at least you can see them. Goku is in his useless Super Saiyan 3 form, and both him and Vegeta run out of energy. Hercule is about to step in and help when Deborah suddenly teleports next to him. It seems that his stint in heaven helped him learn the importance of love and life. Deborah gives the others enough time to use the Dragon Balls to wish for everyone back to life and shit. And then Goku gets ready to use the Spirit Bomb. It ends just how it usually does, except that Deborah's corpse is just lying in the background. Moral of the story?
I make the law.
Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi Tag Team is essentially a portable version of Tenkaichi 2, which when all is said and done is a great accomplishment, as Tenkaichi 2 is a great game, and it is amazing what the developers were able to deliver in such a small package. It has a great selection of characters, the story mode is extensive, and there are some decent extra modes to keep you busy. There are co-op battles that unfortunately I wasn't able to try because, well, we all know by now why. It sucks because I really do think that Tag Team's new mechanics probably shine brightest when you have someone else to play with. Like I mentioned a few times, the partner AI just isn't up to par. Most of the time you have to chase your partner down in order to use any of the co-op features. While it would be nice if the co-op actions were more of a focus in fights, they do integrate well into the already established Tenkaichi fighting system. They don't completely change the way you need to approach a fight, but they do add new strategic opportunities when participating in 2v2 battles. I think if I had someone to play it with, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, but I guess you could say that about anything in life. Dragon Ball Z Raging Blast was released back in 2009 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. And I had absolutely no interest in the game at the time. Back then, I was suffering a bit from franchise fatigue, and the Dragon Ball series as a whole was going through somewhat of a lull period. The series had ended years ago, and Dragon Ball Super was not a thing yet. Honestly, I was kind of sick of just playing through the same events over and over again. Raging Blast was developed by Spike, the same developers of the Budokai Tenkaichi series. Despite the name, many do consider it to be a continuation of the Tenkaichi series. If nothing else, it's the spiritual successor to the series. The story mode in Raging Blast is called Dragon Battle Collection. It sounds like a trading card game. Yes, it is a very accurate description of the mode, but it is really awkward to say. Dragon Battle Collection. This story mode is structured quite differently from other Dragon Ball Z games. When you first enter the mode, you have access to multiple sagas, as well as some what-if scenarios. It's excellent that the game gives you so many options right away. Each fight is represented by a small diorama in each saga. They serve as an invented preview of the fights. I must say, I really like how the menus are designed in this game. When you reach the title screen, the game smoothly transitions to the main menu. Each mode also has its own mini diorama to represent it. It's quick and easy to use, and Shenron can be seen flying around in the background, which looks really cool. The menus are beautifully themed. I understand that menus aren't the most interesting aspects of games and are frequently overlooked, but whoever worked on this put in a lot of effort, and it looks fantastic. I mean, look at all these cool little dioramas. There are a ton of them. You could 3D print these and make some really cool statues. Going into the Saiyan saga, you will notice that some of the stages are blacked out, while others are not. The ones in colour can be played, but the order in which they are available appears to be random. This is due to the fact that not only can you play the sagas in any order, but the majority of the fights within the sagas can be played in any order. In theory, I like this. Giving the player more options is usually a plus, and it is in many ways. Having played through a lot of the Dragon Ball games, I can tell you that playing the same story over and over again gets old. And being able to pursue the story in almost any order I want is a welcome change of pace. The big disadvantage is that Raging Blast has a really bad difficulty curve. It is all over the place. There is no way for the developers to accurately set the difficulty because they do not know when a player will approach each stage, and my first fight is a great example of this. Raging Blast made a poor first impression, which I believe was exasperated by the non-linear approach, as well as a few other factors. Because I had never played this game before, I tried to approach it as if it were my first time playing a Dragon Ball game. Before beginning, I was fairly certain that this game would include a tutorial, as it has become the norm in these types of games. But because I wasn't sure if it would be included in the story mode, I decided to jump right into a match. But not just any match. I selected the one that was most likely to be the easiest, and that was the first stage in the Saiyan saga. Yeah, well, this didn't go as well as I thought. I realized right away that this was not going to end well. I was unfamiliar with the controls, and the game provides little guidance. It does have these prompts that appear on the screen from time to time, but these are for a mechanic that the game doesn't really explain. The camera was an absolute nightmare, and this fight is a 1 versus 2. Not exactly favourable odds for a newcomer. You could argue that I should have learned the controls first, but I don't think my initial approach to the game was unreasonable. Many players, I believe, would jump right into the story mode and be completely overwhelmed as to where to begin. It wouldn't be difficult for the game to prompt a player on a fresh save to go to the tutorial before beginning the story mode. The controls in this game, like in the Tenkaichi series, aren't exactly intuitive. Even for someone who has played the Tenkaichi games before, the differences are significant enough that jumping right into a fight is confusing. Thankfully, Raging Blast has a pretty good tutorial in the dojo mode. It's divided into sections that can be played in any order, so if you already know how to move around and stuff, you can skip the basics. As you progress, the game will mark off which tutorials you have completed. Piccolo will teach you the basics, and then Goku will go into more advanced techniques. When you complete one training section, you have the option of moving on to the next. This appears to be a fairly obvious thing for the game to do, but it was an issue in some of the Tenkaichi games. Tenkaichi 2 in particular was a somewhat perplexing tutorial, where it would tell you how to perform a move and allow you to do it, but it would not recognize when you had finished that section of the tutorial. You'd have to manually pause the game, then return to the tutorial menu and choose the next module. It was so strange. In any case, this tutorial does not do that and effectively guides you through the mechanics. The controls will be explained to you, and you will be required to repeat the moves 3 times in order to pass. Even if the explanation wasn't clear enough, the controls remain on screen the entire time, making it very easy to figure out how the controls work. To put it simply, it's an excellent tutorial. The dojo also allows you to set up practice matches. The practice menu contains an array of options. You can instruct the AI to fight, defend, or practice specific moves against them. A very useful feature that provides an extensive list of tools, which is important for this type of game given that the controls can take quite a bit to get used to. Raging Blast battles take place in fully 3D environments, allowing you to move around fairly freely. The left analog stick is used to move your character, and how hard you press in a direction determines how fast they move. When you get close to an opponent, however, your movement will slow significantly. It's similar to lowering the DPI on your mouse on the fly. When it does this, it can be a little bit strange to get used to, but it does give you more precise control when strafing around your opponent. To be honest, I thought my controller wasn't working properly at first, but it's meant to do this and it's actually a really nice feature. It just takes some getting used to. Dashing is a basic movement technique used to move quickly around the battlefield. This is a useful ability for closing in on an opponent, evading enemy attacks, and positioning yourself for combos or special moves. You can also use the super dash to change directions and approach your opponent from behind. It's worth noting that dashing and super dashing consume ki, so don't overuse them or you'll leave yourself open to counterattacks. Of course, you are also able to fly. To stay in the air, jump into the air and then press the jump button again. The movement is the same in the air as it is on the ground, with the added ability to ascend and descend at normal and dash speeds. Rush attacks are the most basic close range attacks available to your character. As the name suggests, they are quick to perform and can be used to deal damage and set up combos. Rush Blast is the key equivalent, and it can be launched at a rapid pace. It can also be used during dashes and jumping. Multiple basic attacks and movements can be chained together to form combo chains and deal more damage. You can reverse an opponent's direction, break through their guard, stun them, and even fake them out. You have the ability to sweep your opponent's feet out from under them or even knock them up into the air. The ability to teleport while performing a rush attack is one of the most useful moves, so quite a lot can be done by just combining these two attacks with some directional input. Rush attacks can be augmented into charge attacks by holding down the attack buttons for longer amounts of time. The longer the button is held down, the more powerful the attack will be when it is released. The game will teach you that releasing the attack when your character begins to flash will make the attack even more powerful than usual. However, I discovered that this wasn't exactly the case. You must release it just before your character begins flashing. If they are already flashing, it is too late and it will not work. I'm not sure if the timing is so tight that you have to get it right on the frame of the animation where the flashing begins that you don't even notice it, or if the tutorial is simply worded incorrectly and what they mean is to release it right before your character flashes. Anyway, my point is that the timing is very unforgiving, and by the time you see the visual cue, it is already too late. It's one of those moves where you just know the timing after a bit of practice. Yeah, there are cues, but you kind of just know, you know? Charge attacks can also be used when dashing and jumping, just like the rush attacks. While the button inputs are simple, the fighting system relies heavily on your character's timing and positioning, and the context in which you find yourself will often change the attack that is carried out. These states, such as being in the air or on the ground, are fairly obvious. The difficult part is executing these smoothly with the movement system. In the story mode, there is a ton of content to explore. Each saga is very extensive in the fights that they feature, and pretty much every important moment in the Z series is here. The sagas contain scrolls that can be read to get a quick overview of the main story. Each fight also has its own set of text entries that help to explain the plot. There are cutscenes at the start of each fight that provide context and character interactions between the fighters. During fights, there will also be banter between characters. Nonetheless, despite all of this, the story is not well told. It's very disjointed, and if you don't already know the story, these text boxes do little to help you follow the plot. And if you already know the story, there's no point in reading any of this extra stuff because it's not even well written. It offers no new insight into the characters or anything of the sort. It's simply a dull description of events. Given the non-linear nature of the story mode, I don't believe the goal of this mode was to tell the story in any meaningful way. Its main goal is to let the players experience as many of the iconic fights as possible, which it does admirably. Which it does well. When it comes to the story mode, Raging Blast is firmly in the camp of quality. No, the opposite of that. Fuck. Raging Blast is firmly in the camp of quantity over quality. It's not bad, it just lacks the dramatic flair that can be seen when playing through Burst Limit, for example. The amount of fights in Raging Blast contributes significantly to the fact that none of the cutscenes can reach the heights of those seen in Burst Limit. Dragon Ball Raging Blast is a visually stunning game. The character models are highly detailed and accurately represent the series' iconic characters. The extra processing power has allowed the game to achieve a very clean look. Even by today's standards, Raging Blast looks fantastic, and in some cases, better, in my opinion. The cel shading art style just ages beautifully. One thing that I think would improve the look of the characters would to have a little bit of a higher contrast, but other than that, I love the way the characters look in this game. Each character has a few costumes, and some have some cool details. Goku's Super Saiyan hair will vary depending on his gi. He can even be barefoot Super Saiyan 3. Goku's most powerful form up to this point. You can even play as Vegeta in his Ascended Super Saiyan form while dressed in his Buu Saga outfit. Oh, I guess this form is called Super Vegeta? I always thought it was called Ascended Super Saiyan for some reason. I don't know where I got it from. The impressive visual effects used during battles are one of the game's standout features. Over-the-top energy attacks explode with vibrant colours and intense lighting. Character movements and attacks are animated in a fluid and dynamic manner, and I'm happy to report that this game does run at 60 frames per second, which helps it look and feel good to play. Even though there's a lot of content, the game still feels the need to pad out the experience. Okay, so for each fight you can complete missions to earn stars. There are 3 per stage and their requirements vary, but they usually involve performing a specific action during a fight, or beating it on hard. However, when you first select a stage, you will notice that there are no missions. This is due to the fact that you must complete the stage at least once before unlocking the ability to complete missions. This is so stupid, and I have no idea why they felt the need to do this. It's annoying that your first time efforts don't count towards any of these missions, and you'll want to complete these missions because the stars you earn can be used to buy items from the star shop. You'll want to unlock a few notable items such as some costumes, but it's the secret battles that spark my interest. These will unlock some of the what if scenarios. I found the what if scenarios to be the most fun, not only because it provides something new when it comes to the story, but also because the developers had more leeway in experimenting with fight setups, making the what if scenarios the best demonstrations of the game's mechanics. The challenge has to be the least interesting what if scenario. It is very vanilla. It's just Goku fighting a bunch of fighters because they just decided they wanted to fight him.
Okay.
Super attacks differ depending on the character you are controlling, with each character having several that they can perform. There are supers that will increase your stats, some will strike your opponent with powerful blows, barrages and other direct attacks. Supers that launch powerful ki blasts are probably the most recognisable. There are others, but these are the most common. The right analog stick is assigned to super attacks. When I first started out, this control scheme kinda confused me a bit. I frequently found myself using my supers by accident because I kept trying to move the camera with the right analog stick. However, this is not how the camera functions in this game. Apart from this minor hiccup, I really do like the overall control scheme of Raging Blast. It makes use of all the available buttons and does not rely extensively on long press actions. Super attacks can be performed in the air or on the ground, and they typically have a short animation before they activate. Because your character is vulnerable to attacks from opponents during this animation, it's critical to time your super attacks carefully and use them when you have a clear opening. When 2 super ki blasts collide, a beam struggle occurs, which is referred to as a skirmish in this game. To win, you must use your Mario Party skills and rotate the left analog stick as quickly as possible. There's also a melee version that's far more unfair. I say it's unfair because thanks to the camera, it's nearly impossible to predict when one of these skirmishes will occur. They happen when 2 characters collide, but the camera lags behind, resulting in a clash that the AI opponent detects immediately. You, on the other hand, are frequently caught off guard, which means you have already fallen behind and it is extremely difficult to catch up. Losing one isn't a big deal, but it's still annoying. Most supers will require ki, which you can charge manually by holding down on the D-pad. Out of all of the Saiyans out there, why is Vegeta the only one who can't go Super Saiyan? Frustrated and angry, Vegeta decides to take out his emotions on all of the Super Saiyans he can find. You are frequently outnumbered in this game, and you only have a limited amount of health to work with. The health bar isn't really a bar, it's a rounded square, as I believe it's called in America. But in New Zealand, we refer to them as circles. The green colour represents a character's health, which decreases when they take damage. There are small dots above the health gauge. These icons are referred to as health stocks, and they decrease by 1 when the health gauge reaches 0. They are essentially the extra health bars seen in the Budokai series and even the Tenkaichi games, only worse. Why are they so much worse? Well, unlike in previous games where the health gauge changed colour based on how many extra bars you had, this one is always green. It may seem insignificant, but I didn't realise how useful the different coloured bars were until they were gone. When you're in a fight, it's easy to overlook how low your health is because the health stocks are so small, and your final health bar isn't an alarming red colour. When you're on your last bar, your character's portrait flashes red, but it's not a vibrant red, it's more faded and doesn't really stand out as much as I'd like. This colour issue goes for the rest of the gauges too. The colours are very muted and blend into the background when playing on stages with lots of grass. I understand wanting to minimise the HUD aspects, as health bars can be a bit garish at times, but by making it so small, they really needed to nail down the other aspects like the colour to make it more readable at a glance. They, however, do not. The health stocks are too small and blend in too much with the border. There are no contrasting colours to make it instantly readable, and the biggest component of the meter is the character portrait, which is the least important. I like what they are going for, but the execution is poor. The yellow bar represents the ki gauge. When a character uses ki blasts, dashes, or super attacks, the gauge is depleted. Ki can be replenished by charging up manually or by attacking opponents. If you look closely, you can see that the ki gauge is divided into sections. The ki will naturally recover up to these points over time. Vegeta triumphs, but he is still cursed by his inability to achieve the Super Saiyan form, and has lost interest in achieving it. So the moral of the story is, you should give up on your dreams, because everyone else has. Yay! Trading with himself is a what-if scenario where future Trunks returns to the present timeline and meets his younger, brattier self. The game will automatically transform your character during certain fights, such as this one. If you have a character that has different forms, you are able to transform anytime during a fight. A small menu icon will appear if you hold down a trigger. It will display all of your character's available transformations. You are able to skip over some forms. For example, you can skip Super Saiyan and go straight to Super Saiyan 2. You can also power down and then pick another transformation. However, characters who can't transform back, such as Frieza and Cell, can't switch back to their previous form and must progress one transformation at a time. So you can't just go from Frieza's first form to his final form. What's cool is that this game properly depicts Frieza transforming, which is a nice detail. In all the DBZ games I've played before this one, he usually just instantly changes. You can also begin a battle with an already transformed character if you prefer, but not in the story mode, since all of the character's abilities and other attributes are preset. Transformations function more like changing into a different character than as a straight up power boost. This is due to the way the game handles character customization. Also, I'd just like to point out there is no Super Saiyan 4 in Raging Blast, which is disappointing. I enjoy the hairy monkey man.
Monkey!
Future Trunks is impressed by his younger self's transformation into a Super Saiyan. In the end, Future Trunks becomes a Super Saiyan 2 and triumphs over his younger self. The Potara Fusion what-if scenario is divided into two parts. It's Gogeta vs Vegito to see who will win out. A fusion dominated by Goku or where Vegeta has the upper hand. In part 1 you will play as Gogeta and in part 2 you will play as Vegito. Fusions can only be performed during a fight if the appropriate teammate is present. However, before entering a match you can simply select an already fused character. I guess the benefits of fusing mid-battle is that you can choose to do so when your fighter is near death. In fact, I'm not even entirely sure if that's how it works. If it doesn't, it should. Fusion is still a fun mechanic to experiment with, but if I want to play as Gogeta, I usually just choose him at the start. In the end, Vegito loses because he will have to be in a polyamorous marriage.
Well, I'm done. Well, you can all be one big happy family. That should be nice, right? I'm not sure they'll go along with that.
In the match between the Potara earrings and the fusion technique, Vegito won. However, the future of Vegito's family life suddenly seemed very uncertain.
Divorce.
A feud has broken out between Trunks and Goten over some stupid little issue or another. Vegeta and Goku thought it best not to get involved in their kids' argument, but when things get a little too heated, all bets are off. It's a father and son tag team match, no holds barred. In the story mode of Raging Blast, there are two main battle types, single battles and team battles. There is one more type that I will discuss briefly later. Single battles are basically what I've been talking about this entire time, and then there are the team battles, which are pretty much the same but have a few extra features. A team battle can involve multiple characters on each team, or a single fighter versus a team. Each fighter has their own health meter, and when it reaches 0, another character will enter the fight until the entire team has been eliminated. However, you do not have to wait until a character's health reaches 0 to switch out. This can also be done manually. It functions similarly to transforming, but instead of the menu icon displaying your various forms, it will display your team members. Simply press the button associated with the character you want to switch to. There is a cooldown period that must be carried out before you can switch again. When your opponent switches, by pressing the appropriate button combination that appears on screen, this will result in a high-speed blow exchange, which is basically just a quick time event. They do convey the spirit of Dragon Ball Z fight very well though. If you don't press anything, they will just switch in like normal. Vegeta and Trunks end up winning the fight. He tells Trunks that he doesn't have to apologize until he learns that the kids fought because Trunks stole Goten's candy. Trunks apologizes and the two children rekindle their friendship. Even Vegeta apologizes to Goku for Trunks' misbehavior. Good job Vegeta for actually being a responsible father, unlike some people. Are you trying to knock down my green screen? Bardock stands alone against Frieza and is blown away along with his home planet. Before he died, Bardock saw his son Kakarot fighting against Frieza in the future, and then he saw something else. His grandsons. Controlling Bardock, we face off against both his grandsons. Some attacks that involve more than one character can only be performed during a team battle if you have the right characters on your team, and if the necessary conditions are met. For example, if you have Piccolo and Goku on your team and are facing Raditz, Piccolo's special beam cannon will function exactly as it did in the anime. There is the brother Kamehameha, There is also a really special one that can occur when Krillin, Goku and Gohan are on the same team.
Got it! So close!
There are several more and are all based on actual events in the series. They are really cool, but I just wish there are some based on some what-if scenarios. After defeating both of them, Bardock is glad to have fought his grandsons and see how strong they are. Taking up residence in Capsule Corp, Vegeta begins to get closer and closer to Bulma, much to Yamcha's chagrin. Swallowing his fear, Yamcha challenges Vegeta to a fight to see who is worthy of Bulma's hand, because that is how love works.
Love each other? Making a lot of assumptions here.
Also, Trunks is here too. Wouldn't that be awkward as hell for Trunks? He basically participates in a fight over who gets to get with his mum. Yamcha would usually be completely outmatched, but there is a way to give characters a modest boost. Raging Blast's customization is quite robust, with numerous options. Strangely enough, it reminds me of Tetris. You have a variety of effects that you can use on a character's deck. These can vary in shape and size. The more powerful items are usually larger, which means you can't equip as many of them. Each character's deck will start out very small, but it can be expanded in the shop using D points. You can also buy items from this location. Winning fights in the story mode or other game modes will also grant you items. Most of the items will trigger specific effects rather than have straight up stat boosts, though there are those too, but the majority will be something that reduces a ki when performing a certain move and stuff like that. These effects and stat boosts can be stacked as long as they fit on a character's deck. If a character can transform into different forms, each form can be equipped with different items. As such, each form can be tailored to a specific playstyle. If you don't want to bother with customizing each character's form, you can simply copy and paste your decks. I like this system because it gives you a lot of options and it's fun to set up your deck. Since the item types are color coded, it is clear from a glance what a deck is tailored to. The decks aren't the only way to customize your character. You can also specify which special moves you want on each form. Because each transformation has a different selection of specials, you can't have the same ones on every form, unlike decks. However, this is a method of making the various forms stand out from one another and giving you a reason to use each one. The customization system in Raging Blast is pretty good. It gives you plenty to play around with, and having something worthwhile to spend your D points on is nice. I especially like the fact that you can customize a character's special moves. Not many DBZ games give you this option. However, custom characters cannot be used in the story mode, so Yamcha is screwed. Well, not literally. Captain Ginyu has announced that he's auditioning new members for his team. Boruto and Jace, concerned that any new recruits would cut into their own popularity, step in on the battlefield to prove that the Ginyu Force is just fine as it is. One of the game's weakest aspects has to be the camera. I'm not sure how they shipped this game with the camera set up the way it is. It is atrocious. It has difficulty keeping you and your opponent in view. It gets stuck both in and on environmental objects. It occasionally zooms in so close that it clips through your character and you can't see anything. When your opponent is above or below you, you may not be able to see either character. And because the game provides little information about where a character is, you'll have to rely heavily on the dash to automatically home in on your opponent. It can be reset, but it's still really annoying to have to constantly babysit the camera. What's strange about this is that Tenkaichi 1 had the same camera issues, but they were able to fix them in both sequels, so they have basically regressed back to a game released 4 years prior. Did they just forget everything they learned from the original Tenkaichi series? Yeah, I know it's not technically a sequel to Tenkaichi 3, but it's made by the same studio. And even if the development team is entirely different, surely they had some notes or something they could look at. Or, play Tenkaichi 3? Even if they couldn't do any of that, someone must have said, hey, this camera is shit, we should fix it. The game will automatically lock onto your opponent for you, and you will be unable to undo the lock-on. This, I believe, is one of the major reasons why the camera struggles to keep the action in frame, because it is always forced to be orientated around your opponent, whether they are far away or close by. The camera fares better in certain stages, as the more open the arena, the less likely it is to mess up. At the end of the fight, it turns out that both Boruto and Jace were thinking of going solo anyway.
Betrayal! Betrayal! Betrayed me!
The Ginyu Force What If continues with 2 other scenarios, and honestly, they're the least interesting What If scenarios, to me anyway. Like anyone cares what I think. Captain Ginyu still isn't satisfied with his force. He wants a stronger force that more fully represents himself, and he isn't afraid to train his team for as long as it takes. Raging Blast excels at allowing you to play as various characters. It's also pretty cool that the game lets you control villains during fights that they win, instead of winning as the hero but losing in the cutscene. It also gives you a chance to experiment with characters' signature moves. Ginyu defeats the Force members and fires them all, but he is then interrupted by Raccoon, who thinks he should be the leader of the Ginyu Force. This leads into the final part of the scenario. Raccoon, unable to take any more of Captain Ginyu's abuse, challenges him to a fight to see who is worthy of leading the team. Signature attacks are unique to each character. Some are melee attacks, while others dodge, some even use ki blasts. They're pretty cool because they make the characters match the fighting style of the source material. They can also be used to chain combos together, though some are easier to do than others. For example, some will throw your opponent away from you, making it more difficult not to drop the combo, at least for me. There are throws that all characters can do, but some signature moves are also throws, but don't count as throws, I think. Anyway, my point is that some characters make long chains a lot easier. Then there are some that I have no idea how to chain together at all. This game has a pretty decent sized roster, so it is hard to get to grips with all of them. There aren't as many characters as in Tenkaichi 3, but it does include all of the most iconic ones. Strangely enough, this game doesn't feature any Dragon Ball characters or Dragon Ball content, even though this game is called Dragon Ball Raging Blast, not Dragon Ball Z Raging Blast. Raccoon is nowhere near as powerful as Ginyu, but Vegeta appears and defeats Ginyu, claiming that he is a worthless captain, and becomes Captain Vegeta of the newly formed Vegeta Force. Videl decides to become Piccolo's student when Gohan spends more time training with Piccolo than with her. For this fight, it is Videl against both Piccolo and Gohan, which seems extremely unfair, but that's what these what-if scenarios are all about, beating up women. Am I right, fellas? When fighting, you will not always be on the offensive and will need to use defensive moves at times. You can take a defensive stance by holding down the right bumper. You will block your opponent's attacks and take less damage while in this state. Some attacks, such as super attacks, cannot be blocked. You can also use the sway move to evade your opponent's attacks and the vanishing move to teleport. Snap vanishing is much faster, but it must be perfectly timed with the opponent's attacks. Counter stance can be entered briefly. If you're attacked while holding the stance, you will automatically teleport behind your opponent and can attack them in the butt. Ki blasts and even supers can be deflected, but not all of them. Well, maybe you can, but I couldn't get the timing right. Yeah, it was probably that.
The battle to determine the world's strongest Earthling has begun. Who will be number 1?
Krillin. Krillin is. Next question. Broly, the legendary Super Saiyan defeated by Goku, has drifted to Earth, where he has been stuck under ice. After finding him, Dr. Gero brings him under his control, so Broly fights with all his might to get out from under his thumb. Cancelling is a technique that allows you to interrupt certain attack animations and quickly switch to another move. This can be a useful technique for creating long combo chains and for evading enemy attacks. It's worth noting that not all moves can be cancelled, and each character has a unique set of moves that can be chained together to help them feel distinct from one another. When I first started playing, I found this a little bit hard to grasp, mostly because the game doesn't really explain it all that well. A cancel occurs when you interrupt a preceding action animation by performing another move that begins immediately. When this occurs, you will notice a yellow flash across the screen as well as the sound effect. If you repeat a move within a short combo, the cancel will fail and a red flash will appear instead. Wow, that is a rough explanation of how it works anyway. To be honest, I never really got the hang of it. Sometimes I would get a really nice chain and just be like,
how the heck did I do that?
The majority of the time, this was due to the lack of understanding of how to use the character properly, but it also seems that the hitboxes aren't the best. It's a nuisance having to guess if you'll get hit from behind the opponent by an attack that completely misses, or attacking them with a move they can block or deflect from behind. Also, a lot of the time, if you miss an attack, instead of the game playing out the animation and it just not connecting, it simply won't play the animations at all, and you end up with these strange pauses during fights that feel like the game is dropping your inputs. Broly kills both Dr. Gero and Goku, and then he goes on to destroy the Earth. Yay! Chiaotzu cares more for Tien than anyone else in the world, and what a combo they make! To prove they are the best tag team ever, the pair fights a series of tag matches against some formidable foes. Charging your ki and bringing it up to its maximum capacity will turn the gauge blue. Continue to charge your ki and build the blue gauge up to its maximum capacity to enter high tension. You can launch your character's ultimate attack while in this state. These are far more powerful than super attacks and consume all of the ki of the character. These attacks have some of the best animations in the game, and it's fun to watch them play out. Some of them are also quite brutal, like Cell's Seer.
See you!
There's also second form Frieza's Hail Frieza.
I'll show you hell!
And then there is my favourite Android 18's Sadistic 18. Although this one is just copy pasted from Tenkaichi 3, I still really like it. She's just so cool.
It's over!
One of the most detailed is Captain Ginyu's ultimate.
I like that body of yours! Now!
When he uses body change, he takes over Goku's body while retaining all of his moves, poses and voice. The Goku model will even change to include a scouter. I adore the attention to detail that Raging Blast displays. True love prevails, and Chiaotzu and Tien have proven themselves to be the ultimate tag team.
But really, gentlemen, what this film is about is teamwork. And you can't have a superhero film without teamwork.
Hercule ordered Boo to keep the bugs away from his daughter, and Boo's gotten a little carried away. Convinced he's her bodyguard, Boo punches out anyone who dares to threaten Videl. This level actually gave me quite a bit of trouble. You can choose the difficulty before entering a fight, but there is always a mission to complete a level on hard, and I just could not do it. There are 3 fighters to face off against, Yamcha, Gohan and then Kid Buu, and I could never defeat Kid Buu on hard. This seems to be a reoccurring theme in these games. Kid Buu is always aggressively difficult. For the most part, I think this game's difficulty is pretty fair. Easy is ideal for learning the controls, while normal provides a fun challenge without being frustrating. And hard is exactly as described, especially when you're up against a group of fighters. However, hard mode is optional and there are numerous other missions to complete in order to earn stars. Good Boo manages to defeat Kid Boo, and Vidal promises to buy him chocolates, the best prize. Better than stars, that's for sure. The World Tournament has a bit of a novel plan in store this year. The first World Couples Championship. Krillin and Android 18, along with Gohan and Vidal, have no problem making it to the final match. Who will reign supreme as the most powerful couple in martial arts? Raging Blast doesn't have a ton of stages, but the ones it does have are quite big. The designers did an excellent job of making them seem even larger than they are. You can fly up high and look far into the distance. Of course there is an edge to the arena. I don't expect them to go on forever. The arena's edge is marked with a webbing texture that is only visible when a character is right up against it. Many stages contain destructible elements that you can either hit your opponent into or destroy with a ki blast. When hit with powerful attacks, the ground will give way in some stages. One thing I've noticed is that you can no longer ring out your opponent on the martial arts stage. I initially assumed this was only for the story levels, but there is no ring outs in the tournament mode. At least I couldn't get it to work. In the World Martial Arts mode, you can customize the tournament's difficulty and the number of competitors. A tournament has 4, 8 or 16 fighters and the winner receives prizes. You can also play with another player locally, but you will not be eligible for any of the prizes. While Krillin is happy that he was able to prove that he and 18 are the best couple, he is disheartened by Android 18's assertion that she was motivated solely by winning the prize money. Vegeta has finally stepped into Super Saiyan 3 territory. Now it's time for he, Gotenks, Broly and Goku to fight it out and decide who's the strongest Super Saiyan 3 in the universe. This is one of the first games in which you can take on the role of Vegeta and Broly in their Super Saiyan 3 form. I'm not really a fan of this form. I think it's the lack of eyebrows. It makes them look like Neanderthals. Despite the fact that Goku can transform from his base form to his Super Saiyan 3 form, neither Vegeta or Broly can. Instead, their Super Saiyan 3 forms are treated as separate characters. I'm not sure why. Maybe for balance, but that's a stupid reason. Why does everything have to be balanced in the first place? Why can't we just have a really powerful Super Saiyan 3 Broly who annihilates everyone? If they were concerned about the online matches, they could just simply make him unplayable online or something. No game is perfectly balanced anyway. Vegeta eventually defeats everyone and earns the title of the strongest Super Saiyan 3. And that concludes the what if scenarios. Nothing spectacular, but it's always refreshing for a Dragon Ball game to try and add something new to the story. The Raging Blast story mode is extensive, but it doesn't really excel at anything. It's just a lot of okay stuff. Raging Blast has a few other modes, which I won't go into too much detail about because they mostly use the same core game mechanics. There is an online mode that I did not play.
And that's why you don't have any friends.
So I won't be talking about it, apart from the fact that it exists. Versus mode allows you to set up custom matches. We've already gone over single and team battles, but there is one other type, and that is the power battles. In power battles, you build a team based on the power level of each character. The level of a character is determined by how they are customized. There are 5 modes to choose from: 20, 40, 60, 80 and 100. The overall level of the team must fit within these parameters, so you can choose a team with weak characters but more of them, or a team with powerful characters but only a couple on it. Super Battle Trials are a collection of single player modes that you can play with your own customized characters. A few of these modes have appeared in previous GBZ games and are pretty self-explanatory. While fighting these modes, you will sometimes beat the records and unlock a Dragon Ball battle. These Dragon Ball battles consist of a single fight against a random opponent, with the winner receiving a Dragon Ball. If you collect 7 of them, you'll be able to summon Shenron. Shenron will unlock some items. Arcade is pretty much what you would expect. You compete in 10 rounds, earning points for each victory. Survival pits you against 50 different characters. When you drain an opponent's health, another random character will join in. You continue until you either eliminate all 50 opponents or die. Score attack is an intriguing concept. Instead of simply trying to KO your opponent as quickly as possible, you earn points by performing specific moves such as super attacks, smash attacks, and so on. You'll want to vary up your attacks, and does require a bit of strategy to get a high score. Destruction is similar to score attack, but you earn points by destroying the stage. This mode does not appeal to me at all. The camera is just too annoying. Team Attack has set teams that you fight against, with some special parameters. It's a fine mode, but there are just so many teams to fight against. It's a bit overwhelming really. Extreme Battle is a ranking mode. I'm not sure why they didn't just call it Rank Battle or something. This is by far the most difficult mode. As you progress through the ranks, your opponents become more powerful. And by more powerful, I mean more unfair. The punching machine is the game's most unique mode. It's more of a mini game than anything else. You take on the role of Videl and try to rack up as many points as possible on the punching machine. A nice little mini game.
Oh fuck.
Time Attack pits you against 5 extremely weak opponents with the goal of destroying their world as quickly as possible. It's fun. In KO mode, you are an immortal demigod with 300 seconds to smear as many filthy casuals as you can across the floor.
My knee! Oh man.
I feel like I should like Raging Blast more than I actually do. It borrows heavily from Budokai Tenkaichi 3, but it doesn't really improve on it. It feels like a step backwards in some ways. The customization is fantastic, but you don't even get to use it for a large portion of the game. The controls take some getting used to, but once you do, it feels great to chain moves and execute your ultimates. However, the camera gets in the way, or you encounter odd pauses within the combat and it just takes you out of it. Raging Blast looks better, but it doesn't play better. And I think that's why I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. It's okay.
A 70cm square window.
Raging Blast 1 felt like a bit of a downgrade from Spike's previous Budokai Tenkaichi series. Many of the flaws that had been addressed in the previous 3 titles had resurfaced, but Raging Blast was the start of a new series, and for a new generation of consoles, and the Budokai Tenkaichi series didn't exactly get off to a great start either. Raging Blast 2 was released in 2010, just 1 year after the first title. Many people consider this game to be one of the best DBZ games out there, so I was expecting quite a bit from the sequel. Something along the lines of the improvements seen from Tenkaichi 2, which was a huge jump in quality from Tenkaichi 1. So did Raging Blast 2 meet these expectations? I'm pretty sure the character models are the same as in the first game, at least for the returning characters. Now I don't think that reusing assets is a bad thing, especially these models. They are highly detailed and look pretty much exactly how I'd imagine the Dragon Ball characters to look in 3D. Despite the fact that the models are the same, Raging Blast 2 has a slightly different art style. Instead of the same flat cell shading, the characters in the game make extensive use of specular shading. Specular lighting is a graphical effect that simulates how light reflects off shiny or glossy surfaces, but instead of just using it on materials like armor or metal, stuff that might be shiny, it is applied to the entire character, making them appear to be made of shiny plastic. And I think this art style makes the game look way worse than Raging Blast 1.
Okay, I'm going to show you something now. Have a look at this. Okay. This is what you think is great, and I think it is bloody horrible.
It seems like the developers wanted to make the game look different, but didn't have enough time, so they just turned up the specular on everything. Yet, looking at some of the studio's later Dragon Ball games, this art style appears to have become their go-to. So Raging Blast 2 is more like their first attempt at creating this style, and quite frankly, it shows. The models are designed with a flat cell shading style in mind, and they work exceptionally well for that. But when you try to make them look more realistic, and I use the term realistic very loosely here, when you try to make these models look more realistic without changing the textures or normal mapping, they look strangely shiny. Raditz is one of the models who has suffered the most as a result of this change. Look at his hair. It looks awful. It clearly was not modelled with this shading style in mind. The game's aesthetic takes on an action figure motif, which would actually work way better with the first game, where the menus and stuff were presented as little dioramas. I mean, I still wouldn't like it as much as the flat cell shading, but it would fit in better with the overall style. I will say though that the lighting on the characters when they are transformed and powering up is quite striking. The menus in the game are a huge downgrade. The dioramas that I adored have been replaced with standard menu design. It has a galaxy theme throughout and doesn't look bad, but it's a bit generic when compared to the creativity seen in Raging Blast 1. The animations are fast-paced, fluid and highly stylized, as one would expect from a Dragon Ball game. With exaggerated movements and intense impacts, the animation is intended to capture the source material's high energy. Do people not have mufflers in this neighborhood? Bloody hell. The animation is intended to capture the source material's high energy, over-the-top action with characters moving and fighting at incredible speeds while unleashing powerful energy blasts and signature moves. With Vegeta with his fancy footwork, Future Trunks slashes his sword, and Future Gohan with his one-handedness, even though he still has two. Is it just me, or does Spike always animate Future Gohan like he is missing one arm? But they never commit to the model only having one arm. In any case, each character's movements are highly detailed, expressing their unique personalities and fighting styles. Attacks feel very powerful, with impact and speed lines emphasizing actions. The sky will darken and change in stages as you power up. A really cool detail when performing key attacks is that the more powerful the character is, the bigger the debris will be.
I better hurry up and take you down! Okay, let's go! I'm gonna knock you out! My knee!
The stages are large and highly detailed. They've got some nice destructible elements that help to sell the strength of some of these attacks. Characters will recoil and flinch when attacked and will show battle damage as fights rage on. The key effects are absolutely stunning. The ultimate attacks, as usual, are a huge highlight. When Tien uses Neo Tri-Beam, he loses health and will eventually fall to the ground.
Neo Tri-Beam!
Is he okay?
Future Gohan will perform an awesome little flip when using Fierce Combination. Taba will even call in his spaceship to bash a fighter's face in. What's your favorite ultimate attack? I like that one too. Oh, I'm dying. Honestly, what really sells a lot of these ultimates is the character's reaction. They're just like... I'm dying. Galaxy mode is this game's story mode, except it isn't, because there is no story mode in this game.
Did they say why? Did they say?
This really sucks. Considering how extensive Raging Blast 1's story mode was, this is a huge downgrade. Well, I guess it isn't a downgrade, it's more like a no grade because it doesn't exist. Now you're probably thinking that wasn't I just complaining in the Raging Blast 1 video that I was sick of playing through the same story over and over again? And what I have to say to that is, I'm a woman. What'd you expect? Complaining is what we do best. We complain that it's too dark, man make fire. It's too cold, man build house. I'm bored, PlayStation. That's what makes the world go round. Oh god. I was just waiting for a person with pink and blue hair to break down my door and scream at me. This video has gone so derailed. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, Dragon Ball. Even though I am sick of playing through the Dragon Ball Z story, I still would like a story mode. preferably one with an original story, or they could do more of those what-if scenarios that they had in the first game. I like those. I mean, they were nothing amazing, but they were at the very least entertaining. Galaxy Mode does this in a way, but there are no cutscenes or anything, just a lot of little interactions between characters through banter during fights.
Answer me. Who are you?
It's Big Green!
Let that child alone.
One thing that threw me off a bit was when I first heard Teen Gohan's voice.
Don't expect any mercy from me.
I was like, pardon? This is the first Dragon Ball game in a long time that does not feature the Funimation voice cast in the English dub. It uses the Dragon Ball Kai cast. While I prefer the Funimation voices because that's what I grew up with, the Kai cast isn't necessarily bad. They're just different. Even if you don't like the English dub, you can switch to the Japanese voices. Every character has their own Galaxy Mode, which consists of several fights laid out on a grid. Fights will have varying levels of difficulty, as well as a variety of challenges. The difficulties of a stage are a little misleading. Well, not really misleading, more that they're poorly conveyed. When a stage is rated as very difficult, it does not necessarily mean that it is more difficult than a stage rated as hard. This is because it refers to the difficulty of the CPU, rather than the overall stage difficulty. As a stage, having the CPU set to very hard, but only fighting one character is much easier than facing off against a team of 4 fighters set to hard. At least for the most part. I think every time actually. The most difficult challenges, however, is overcoming some of the special conditions that the game will impose on certain stages. For example, in some fights you will begin with extremely low health. This will be no problem if you're a skilled enough player, but if you're like me, there is a system in the game that can help turn the tides in your favour. This is done through character customization. The customization isn't as good as the first game, but it does have some cool aspects to it. Each character has 10 slots. There is a point system that you must adhere to. Each character has a different number of limit points. Items are assigned to a point value. Generally, the more powerful an item, the higher its point value. This system kind of sucks because there isn't really a way to create a really overpowered character. My first thought is that they did it this way to keep the online more balanced. But then when I looked it up, it turns out that you couldn't use items online anyway, so I don't know what they were thinking with this. Some items that you equip characters with will actually give them debuffs and other downgrades. The payoff is that these items will also give the character more limit points. I really like the concept of the system, which allows you to customize a character's strengths and weaknesses. However, due to the limited number of equipment slots, a character can only be truly great at one thing. I would much prefer it if you could equip a lot of items to make a really OP character. This is Dragon Ball. I want to be powerful enough to destroy planets and have the bodies piled up high. Well, you know, just for fun. Not all items are for improving stats and abilities. There are also items that are purely for aesthetic. You can change a character's aura, one of the coolest being this awesome looking blue fire.
I'm boo da boo dee da boo die. I wanna die.
And you can even make everyone dead. Yay. Despite the fact that the customization isn't as good as it was in the first game, it has the huge advantage of being usable in Galaxy Mode. And this is how you can get around some of the more challenging fights in the mode. You can equip items that allow you to bypass some of the fight's parameters. You can equip the item Health Auto Recover in fights where you start with extremely low health. When the match begins, you can play Keep Away for a while to replenish your health. Prompts will appear on the top right corner of the screen during some fights. These are referred to as perfect actions. They can range from using a specific move to dealing a certain amount of damage in a combo, transforming, and a lot more. You will be rewarded with items if you complete all of these actions. This is how you obtain the items that can be used to avoid some of the special mission conditions in Galaxy Mode. As previously stated, each character has their own Galaxy Mode, and the game claims to have a total of 100 characters, but there are really only 60. The game counts the transformations as different characters, but honestly, they are being deliberately misleading. Nobody thinks of Goku in his Super Saiyan form as a different character than Goku in his base form. They knew what they were doing. Not all characters will be unlocked from the get-go, and you will need to play through Galaxy Mode to unlock them. In fact, in this mode, you will be unlocking a lot of stuff. When you begin a Galaxy playthrough with Goku, for example, he will only have access to his base form to begin with. As you progress through the mode, you will gain access to all of his transformations, with the exception of Super Saiyan 4, which is still not available in this game, because they don't like GT. GT did not happen, does not exist. But they do have the Big Bang Kamehameha, even though there is no Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. we're just gonna ignore that. You also gain access to more supers, items, and for some reason, some random screenshots from the show. And when I say random, I mean really random. Like, what the heck?
Got a nice tip for you right here in my pocket for my arthritis. Why don't you reach in there and fish it out for yourself?
Out of the hundreds of episodes and the thousands of frames, they picked this one. This one? Some fights are team battles, but these fights will be grayed out until you unlock the supporting character. A character's galaxy board or grid, or whatever it's called, will start off quite small, but it will branch out as you complete fights. There's also a boss fight in each galaxy that has a kind of flaming effect around the node. That's how you know it's a boss fight. It also just says it's a boss in the description, which I only just noticed when watching back the footage. I'm an idiot. You will receive a Dragon Ball for defeating a boss. If you collect all 7, you will be granted a wish from either Shenron or Piranga. Piranga is a rare summon, and I don't believe there is any way to influence the RNG to get him. As far as I can tell, it's completely random. Like in the source material, he will grant you 3 wishes instead of only 1. The Galaxy mode is quite good for what it is. There are plenty of battles to complete, and it's nice that you can play as any character you want. They put in a lot of unique lines of dialogue between characters. While not a replacement for a story, it does make the fights more interesting. However, it feels more like an extra mode to play on the side, instead of being the main mode, as Dragon Battle Collection was for Raging Blast 1. All of the characters will be unlocked as you make your way through Galaxy mode, aside from one. Kachi can be obtained by simply going to the museum and watching the Plan to Eradicate the Super Saiyans OVA. It was originally released in Japan on July 23rd, 1993, but not this version, as this is actually a remake, with completely redone animation and script. Here's a short summary of the events.
First guy to die loses!
The film is available right from the beginning of the game, so you can just get this guy straight away. Spike has always done a good job of incorporating elements from the Dragon Ball Z films into their games. Not only are the characters from the various films included, but some of the attacks seen in the films are also recreated.
Time for your punishment! I'll teach you! Get that drop!
Now I see why my brother was no match.
I know I keep going on about the cool little details in these games, but they really are my favourite things about them. Raging Blast 2's other main mode is called Battle Zone. These are a series of battles in which you can fight as any character and with any items you want. However, stats can be obtained by fulfilling various conditions in battle zones. Super attacks unused and stat bonus items unequipped will always be 2 of the stamps for each battle, so if you want to earn more stamps, you must be mindful about the items you equip to your character. As you progress through the battle zones, the number of challenges will increase, and the majority of them will require you to equip items with debuffs. Each zone will also be assigned a handicap. So what exactly do the stamps do? They're similar to the stars in Raging Blast 1. As you collect these stamps, you will gain access to more content, such as items and weird screenshots. When you complete a battle zone, you will occasionally unlock enhanced characters. Enhanced characters are equipped with preset items that cannot be changed, but are usually quite powerful. It's kind of unclear as to when these characters will be unlocked though. I got nothing when I beat Zone 1 as Goku, but when I beat it as Trunks, I got his enhanced version. I don't know why. Is it because the last boss is his dad and beating up your dad is good? Alternate routes will be available in some zones. These routes appear when certain conditions are met. After completing all the battle zones, the ultimate zones will become available and they are much more difficult. I'm going to be honest with you guys, I gave up. The battle zone just feels a lot like playing through Galaxy mode, but with extra steps, and I was kind of getting a bit burnt out. So yeah, this was the last mode I played and I was kind of like, I'm kind of done. That's just me being honest. As for the other modes, Raging Blast 2 has a good practice mode that is pretty much identical to the first game. There is also a tournament mode, but I'm not going to go over it, we all know what it's about. There's online, which is most likely dead at this point, and then there is the museum, where you can look at all your amazing screenshots. Fighting in Raging Blast 1 was a little sluggish, the hitboxes were inconsistent, there are strange pauses in the combat, and the controls felt unresponsive at times. It was by no means bad, it just really needed some refinement, and that is exactly what Raging Blast 2 achieves. The core mechanics are essentially the same, but they have been improved to make actions feel more intentional. It's a little faster paced, combos are smoother, weird pauses are mostly gone, and it just feels a lot better to play in general. Since I already went over a lot of the mechanics in my Raging Blast video, and the gameplay is so similar to the original, I won't go into too much depth here, at least in the aspects I've already discussed. The basic movement is the same as it was in Raging Blast 1. You will automatically lock onto your opponent and be able to move around them using the analog stick. Using steps and dashing will allow you to position yourself and to set up attacks and combos at almost any angle. Depending on where you are, will sometimes change the attack that a character will perform. Steps are a situational technique used in a close proximity to your opponent before, during or after attacks and combos. Dashing makes a comeback and remains one of the most effective movement tools. A homing dash is ideal for quickly approaching your target, but it can also be cancelled by pressing the guard button halfway through. This is known as a sudden stop. The ability to cancel a homing dash is surprisingly useful because sometimes you just want to get close to your opponent, but not right up in their face, and it's nice to have this option so easily available. This technique can also be used to cancel into a super dash and get behind your opponent. Sudden stops can also be used when super rising, but honestly I never used it this way. Mostly because it's kind of hard to see when you really want to stop, thanks to the way the camera works. One of the biggest weaknesses to the movement, specifically the super dash, has to be the camera. When using a super dash, it has the habit of lagging behind. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens frequently enough to be an issue. When super dashing, your character will approach the opponent from behind at a high speed, and the camera will pull back to show the dash before cutting to a close-up to the characters. However, sometimes it takes longer to cut to the close-up view, and your character is unable to perform any actions until the camera catches up. It does the same thing in Raging Blast 1, but it stands out more in this game because it's one of the few times when the camera is really annoying. If you haven't watched my Raging Blast 1 retrospective, one of the things that annoyed me the most about that game was the absolutely atrocious camera. If I'm being completely honest, it almost ruined the entire game for me. The camera was dead set on riding your character's ass and would constantly clip through it, or find the absolute worst camera angle imaginable. Thankfully, the camera in Raging Blast 2 is far superior. It doesn't stick so close to your character's back and will move to more of a side view, making both fighters way more visible. The camera no longer lags behind the action now that the game allows it to pull back slightly. It keeps track of the player and opponent during battles even if they move quickly or jump into the air, for the most part. It still has some issue when a character is directly above or below you. Overall, I am really happy with the improvements they made to the camera. When you send your opponent flying into the air, you can follow it up with a pursuit attack. By pressing the dash or rush button immediately after launching them, your character will chase them down and hit them in a different direction, which you can change by tilting the left stick in the desired direction. In a teleport pursuit, you will teleport to your opponent and knock them around. When your character is in high tension mode, they will end a chase sequence with a super attack. A total of 5 pursuits can be chained together. They occur quite often during fights and feel very DBZ-ish. They're entertaining when you're the one doing the pursuing, but they're a pain when you're on the receiving end. The animations can be quite lengthy, especially when doing 5 in a row. Assault Chase is similar to Pursuit, but it has more of a melee focus, allowing you to extend your combos. Every Assault Chase begins with rush attacks, and is then followed by a specific combination of key, signature, charge, dashes, and so on. However, this combination is unique to each character. Sort of. Each character is assigned a different type of Assault Chase. I believe there's like 6 or 7 of them, or maybe 5, I don't know. There's more than one, which is one too many. So you'll have to memorize the appropriate combo for the character you're using. Or do what I do and start the Assault Chase and then mash all of the buttons. There is some luck involved, but it works surprisingly well.
60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
What? You're expecting some MLG shit? If you hadn't noticed from my other videos, I suck. So I just do what works for me. Unless you're in Raging Soul mode, there is a hard limit to how many Assault Chases and combos you can do in a row. Raging Soul can be activated when first entering High Tension. The game will only give you a small window of time to enter this mode, so you need to make sure to press the button at the correct time. When in Raging Soul mode, your character is surrounded by a massive purple aura and the sky darkens. Even the music will change. You can set the music that plays when in Raging Soul mode by going into the options, but this option is only available if you wish for it from Shenron, which I think is kinda stupid. Just let me pick the music I want. Although if this game was released today, they would probably have it as some sort of DLC that you would have to pay for. I'm sorry, I'm getting very cynical in my old age. Unfortunately, it's not as awesome as the game makes it out to be. Raging Soul will increase your character's strength and allow you to string longer combos and assault charges together. This is great if you're good at the game, but the main disadvantage of this mode is that you can't use any super or ultimate attacks. Raging Soul constantly depletes the key gauge and the mode ends when it reaches 0. Some of the most useful defensive tools in the game are guarding, evading and teleporting. With the exception of charge attacks, throws and ultimates, the guard will block almost everything. While guarding from attacks, if you can get the timing right, you will be able to deflect incoming super attacks by flicking the left stick. If you succeed, it will display this cool little animation. There's also the option of completely avoiding a super attack, though this is a much riskier move, because if you don't press the guard button at the exact right time, you will either end up blocking if pressed too early. If pressed too late, you'll be hit by it. I usually just end up going for the deflecting option, since you can kind of cheat it by constantly rotating the stick. You will get it almost every time. It's a legitimate strategy. Most attacks can be avoided by guarding right before a hit, so you'll want to practice timing correctly. It will save you a lot of health. Speaking of health, let's talk about the health bar, or as it's known in America, the rounded square health meter. Raging Blast 2 addresses many of the issues I had with the first game, but it also introduces new ones. And just to get it out of the way, it's the health stocks. That's what is worse. They are extremely difficult to see, especially on a grassy stage. The colours of the gauge were changed to be much more vibrant, and the flashing is more visible when in low health. They still didn't make the multiple health gauges different colours, which seems like a simple thing to do, but they didn't. As a whole, the HUD is much more user friendly. If you're knocked down, you can roll by pressing any of the face buttons immediately before hitting the ground. This is great for making a quick recovery, and you can even go straight into a dash after finishing a roll, allowing you to jump right back into the action. In this game, quick recovery is much less annoying. Instead of having to waggle the analog stick, you just have to press the face buttons, which is way less awkward, and you won't want to be knocked down for long, as you can be thrown when lying on the ground. Raging Blast 2 has a lot of these minor gameplay tweaks that just make it feel better to play. Raging Blast 2 maintains the rush, smash and signature attacks from the first game, which can be chained together to deal damage to your opponent. As many of you are probably aware, I found cancels to be the most difficult part of the game to learn, so take this next point with a grain of salt. But following up on each attack is a lot easier to do than in Raging Blast 1. The game doesn't rely as much on cancels to create long combos. It makes the characters feel more similar, but it also makes the gameplay feel more smooth, and honestly easier to grasp. Yes, this does mean that you can get away with button mashing at times, but it won't get you that far, as Raging Blast 2, just like its predecessor, requires good positioning and timing from the player. The gameplay is more responsive, snappier, and those weird pauses that I experienced in the first game are pretty much gone. Spike did an excellent job of refining the fighting system of Raging Blast 1. Raging Blast 2 improves upon the gameplay of the first game and fixes a lot of the issues. There are more characters and stages, but the mode feels more like an extension to Raging Blast 1 rather than a sequel. It feels like half of the game is missing. If they were to combine both of these games together, with Raging Blast 1's story and graphics paired with 2's better gameplay, it would be a pretty excellent Dragon Ball game. As it stands, it's decent, but a little underwhelming. If I had to pick one, I'll go with Raging Blast 1 as it caters more to my taste, even though 2's gameplay is much better. As you can probably tell, I'm not exactly that enthused about the Raging Blast series. It was trying to be an evolution of the Budokai Tenkaichi series, but in many ways it feels like a de-evolution. The name Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Tenkaichi invokes the image of the best that the series has to offer. All of the experience gained from developing Tenkaichi 1 through to 3, as well as the Raging Blast titles, has all culminated to create the Ultimate Tenkaichi game. The word ultimate in the Oxford English Dictionary is defined as not this game. When playing through this game, the main reoccurring thought I kept having was, why is it like this? I just genuinely do not understand what the developers were going for. It's like they took Raging Blast, which admittedly does have its problems, but instead of fixing those problems, they made them way worse, and then slapped an ugly as sin retexture on all of the models and called it a day. I've had people in the comments say that Tenkaichi 2 is their favourite in the series, and some will say that Raging Blast 2 was the best. While I personally disagree, I get it. I get why people would feel this way. Tenkaichi 2 has an amazing story mode, Raging Blast 2 has really refined gameplay. I get it, I understand. But Ultimate Tenkaichi? There are people in this world that think Ultimate Tenkaichi is the best. Are you fucking kidding me? Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Tenkaichi was released on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2011. It is the final entry in the Budokai Tenkaichi series, but not for long as Tenkaichi 4 has been announced, so even the other definition for the word ultimate doesn't even apply anymore. If I were to sum up Ultimate Tenkaichi's gameplay in a single word, it would be really boring and repetitive. It has a similar control scheme to Raging Blast, but all of the mechanics have been stripped down to the point where you feel like you have no control. It doesn't really matter what you do in a fight because they all end up the same way. Get close to your opponent, tap the rush attack 3 times, tap it again, and then tap it while holding a direction to continue the cutscene. Cutscene ends and then you start tapping again.
Tappa, tappa, tappa.
Okay, so there's a little bit more to the gameplay than that, but you could go through the entire game like that and be perfectly fine. The fights do take place within fully 3D environments, and while you can move around in all directions, it's actually quite restrictive, but in a really weird way. You have the option of switching between 2 states. There is melee range and blast range. What actions you can conduct will vary depending on which mode you're in. While in melee range, you can utilize physical attacks such as the rush attack, which is your fast attack, and the smash attack is your heavy attack. And that's about it. I'm not joking, that literally is it. You can't even mix the 2 attacks together. The days of stringing attacks together into extended combos and expanding them into signature moves are long gone. You can now either hit them hard or hit them fast. Aside from being terribly restricting, it also makes the controls feel exceedingly unresponsive. The pause when switching from using a light to heavy attack is too clunky, and it just feels like buttons don't do anything half the time. You can dodge oncoming attacks, but you don't need good timing or anything, as your character will just automatically dodge as long as you have the evade button held down. I've heard a few people compare the combat to a paper scissors rock system, but this is a generous comparison, as most of the combat comes down to a simple coin flip. When you land 3 rush attacks in a row, the game will slow down. This is known as an attack clash. At this time you can choose between a rush attack and a smash attack. However, if your opponent predicts which attack you will use next, it will be negated. Both fighters will return to the melee range state, so there is a 50-50 chance that your attack will fail. Not because you made a mistake with the button sequence or timing. No, it fails because your opponent correctly guessed. It is infuriating and only serves to drag out fights even longer. Sometimes you will go through multiple clashes only for nothing to happen. Remember how everyone loved Dragon Rush in Budokai 3? Well, of course you don't remember that because it didn't happen. No one liked Dragon Rush. It was the worst part about that game. Despite this, the developers decided it was a good idea to base an entire fighting system around this concept. The only way to avoid the coin flip is to attack from behind or when in strike booster mode. This mode will also bypass the coin flip and extend out the attack clash. It can only be used when your ki is fully charged. It will also reduce your maximum ki once it runs out. If you successfully initiate an attack clash, you can continue it by pressing the rush or smash button while holding a direction. That is at least what the game teaches you. However, I discovered that you don't need to hold a direction because it would still continue if you just hit the button. Although using different directional inputs seems to change the animation that plays. So if you want to break up the monotony, I'd recommend mixing it up a little. You can charge a smash attack to knock your opponent back. From here you can follow up with a pursuit attack, which is pretty much exactly the same, but it will build up your spirit gauge. If you're on the receiving end of one of these clashes, you can try and recover by mashing the face buttons as much as possible. How much do you need to mash? Well, bugger if I know, because it hardly ever seems to do anything. I'm guessing a lot, but the game never explicitly tells you, just until it deems it enough, I guess. You will be given a chance to counter attack if you press the button at the correct time. If you haven't already guessed, this game includes a lot of quick time events.
Which was the style at the time?
Now, I don't have a hate burner like some people do for QTEs, and I think they can work well, especially if the game is built around them, like this game sort of is. Having said that though, I despise them in this game. They are annoying and make the game way more boring than it needs to be. Blast range is where you can perform ki attacks and also dash around your opponent. There are two types of ki attacks, rush ki attacks and heavy ki attacks. Rush ki attacks feel largely ineffective because they deal little damage and are easily avoided. The camera is so far away from your opponent that you can't even tell if you're hitting them or not. The heavy ki attack is more useful because it helps you build up spirit. Spirit is a separate resource from ki, and it does a lot of things that ki used to allow you to do, such as perform super attacks. I think they decided to split up the gauge to prevent players from spamming supers and ultimate attacks, as they were quite spammable in Raging Blast 1 and 2. However, I believe that they went too far, considering in most fights, neither side will end up using any supers, and ultimates are even more rare. You have to go into a fight aiming to perform an ultimate, as if you fight merely just to win, the battle will most likely be over before you even come remotely close to getting one off. That was a weird line. I didn't realise it until I said it out loud. Unlike the ki gauge, which can be charged by simply holding down the D-pad, spirit can only be built up by landing heavy hits in pursuits. There are arrows on the gauge that indicates how much spirit you need to use the supers you have equipped. Ultimate attacks are only available when there is enough spirit in the gauge and the spirit high mode is active. Spirit high mode is activated when either you or your opponent has low health. It makes no difference which. So it works as both a comeback mechanic as well as a lose or hope mechanic. But as I already stated, ultimates hardly ever occur, so it doesn't really matter if it's balanced or not. The individual on the receiving end has the option of guarding, evading or intercepting. Which actions you can take depends on how much ki you have. Guarding uses the least amount of ki and just reduces the amount of damage taken by the attack. Evade costs a little more ki and entirely avoids the attack, but in order to be successful you must correctly time a button prompt. Intercept demands the most ki and will result in a beam struggle. To win the struggle you must first win the war of button tapping.
Tappa, tappa, tappa.
It's nice that you have a chance to fight back, but for the amount of effort it takes to even perform supers, it's kind of annoying that it can be so easily negated. It almost doesn't seem worth it. Some supers can only be done at blast range, while others can only be performed at melee range. If you try to use the super while in the wrong range, the game will automatically relocate you into the correct range. A cutscene will play and you must press left or right. If you press the wrong direction, you will incur extra damage. You see, in this game you can't just seamlessly go from one range to another. To ensure that you know where you are, the game must play a cutscene and display a prominent text prompt. I mean, in previous Tenkaichi games players were trusted to handle things themselves, but we can't give people too much control since they might end up having fun. And we can't have that. Oh, and you can also taunt at this game.
Who do you think you are, you snot-faced little punk? Let me make this clear for you, okay? You are nothing! If you were in my toilet bowl, I wouldn't bother flushing it. My bath mat means more to me than you.
But from what I can tell, it doesn't do anything. But the game does go out of its way to explain that you can do it, but not what to do it for. There are 41 characters, which is nowhere near the amount seen in Tenkaichi 3. It's not like more characters will make much of a difference anyway, since everyone plays the same. The Tenkaichi fighting system has been so watered down that it is an absolute slog to play through. The QTEs are obnoxious and most actions are based on a coin flip. You have to watch your character play out the exact same attack animations over and over again. Everyone fights the exact same way apart from their supers and ultimates, but you hardly get to use them anyway, so you probably won't even notice the difference. The little control you have is clunky as hell, and half of the mechanics you don't end up using because they don't have enough impact on fights. Most fights take less than a minute, but even that feels like an eternity. It's just so boring to play. This game is ugly. I hate the way it looks. I hate the way I look. Spike's 7th gen titles have just gotten worse and worse looking. They went from Raging Blast, which I consider one of the best looking Dragon Ball games, to this game, which is definitely one of the worst. The colours are so muted. This was a reoccurring theme with the 7th gen. Let's strip away the colour of everything because that makes it more realistic. Because real life is absent of colour, apparently. I hate the way the characters are textured. It looks like they've been dropped in mud and then someone tried to wipe the mud off but they didn't have any water, so they licked a napkin and tried to wipe it off that way, but instead of it being wiped clean, there is a thin layer of dirt over everything.
You phrased that really weird, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
The opening lulls you into a false sense of security. It's a beautiful 2D animation with Shala Hedshala playing in the background. After it has finished playing, it will lead you to a quite nice looking title screen, but once you press start, you are met with an ugly ass main menu. It's so dark and everything is so small. You can zoom in on the characters, but even the max zoom is tiny. The stages are probably the best looking things in the game because they actually fit the more realistic art style. You don't really get to explore the stages at all anyway because of the way the fights play out. Ultimate Tenkaichi's core gameplay system relies a lot on in-game cutscenes. They are constantly being triggered pretty much whenever a player does anything. I'm not exaggerating, they are that frequent. While the animations during these are pretty decent looking, you will be seeing the same ones over and 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 over again. There is a very serious lack of variety. Fighters do have slightly different looking fighting styles, but again, you will only see a very slight difference in the animations. The continuity between attacks is all over the place. Characters will be constantly teleporting around. 1 second they're attacking on the ground, and then they're in the air, and then on the ground again. It's kind of lucky that the game is quite restrictive with your movement options, because it would get very disorientating very quickly. Some of the larger key attacks, as well as the auras, are quite nice, but not the best the series has seen. The colours are just too muted and kind of meh. Because of the colour palette, Super Saiyans in this game all look like legendary Super Saiyans, with the unripe banana colour rather than a blonde or golden yellow. One thing the game does well, kind of well, is that the characters do actually emote when attacking. They have fierce looks on their face when launching powerful ki blasts and a flurry of punches, but the lip syncing is awful. Characters will become battle damaged when hit with big attacks, which is a really nice detail. Another really cool inclusion is recreation of scenes from the anime. The 2D animations are great and easily the best part of the game. At least for me anyway, these were my favourite parts of the game. Kind of sad, the non-gameplay part was my favourite part of the game. Unfortunately they don't match with the pseudo-realistic art style of the rest of the game. And yes, I am nitpicking, because this game is annoying me. It's annoying because the game does some really cool stuff, but the overall package just sucks. The game's story mode simply follows the story of the Dragon Ball Z anime, with the addition of a few significant battles from the various DBZ movies and even the Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta vs Omega Shenron encounter in GT. That was a long sentence. Unlike in most DBZ games, it doesn't start with a fight against Raditz. It instead begins with Bardock's final stand against Frieza. The first fight is impossible to win, since the game will automatically play a cutscene showing the destruction of Bardock and Planet Vegeta. The story mode features a map that you will be able to fly around, very similar to the one seen in Budokai 3 and in Tenkaichi 2. From here you can find collectibles, battle and optional fights, and of course access the story fights. While the flying isn't as smooth as in those other games, I do appreciate getting to explore the map, even if there isn't much to it. The main story fights will have huge auras emanating from it, and there is also a mini map in the corner to help you navigate. There will be sequences depicting the characters playing out significant moments from the source material before, during, and after critical fights. It is quite well done, although there are large chunks of the story missing, so it's not the easiest to follow if you don't know it already. It's a decent story mode for what it is, but the gameplay is so tedious that I didn't enjoy it at all, aside from the 2D cutscenes, which are fantastic. Now I'm skimming over the story mode a lot. That's because I'd like to discuss the game's new hero mode. It follows the same structure as the story mode, but includes a few new mechanics. Hero mode allows you to create your own character and play through an entirely new story. However, customization is extremely limited, particularly in the start. You only have 3 different hair and body options. To be honest, it feels rather half-assed. You can't even choose whether you want to play as a male or female. The story does refer to the character as being a guy, but they could have easily changed up some of the dialogue to be gender neutral. The only thing you have a lot of say over are the colours of your character. What your character will be good at will be determined by the 3 different body types. The standard type, and yes, that is what it's called, has a good balance of attack and defense. This type can learn many types of moves and super attacks through training and is the most customizable of the 3 types. Light types excel with blast range attacks and defense. Though small, this type is the most talented of the 3 types in the use of ki. Heavy type specializes in melee range attacks and defenses. This physically talented type has the strongest melee attacks of the 3 types. I just went with the standard type, and I'm not really sure how much of a difference the types actually impact fights. But given how the gameplay in Ultimate Tenkaichi works, I doubt it matters that much what type you choose. Just like in the story mode, there is an overworld map you can freely fly around. Also, just like in the story mode, there are main story fights and optional fights, but the difference is that there is a bit more of an incentive to do the optional fights. In hero mode, your character will gain experience and level up a variety of stats after each fight. There are a lot of extra fights, so there are plenty of opportunities to power up your hero. Although it can be a bit of a grind as some fights don't offer much experience. For example, you can enter into a martial arts tournament and win it and get bugger all experience. And the tournaments don't even have ring outs. The fights are just the same as all the others. Given the size of the arena though, it's no surprise that no one can get a ring out. You can strengthen your hero in other ways besides gaining experience. You can learn new abilities and equip super attacks. These can be obtained through training. As you progress through hero mode, you will meet new masters with whom you can spar in training mode. The more you spar with them, the more skills you will learn. The concept behind this approach is really appealing to me, since you're actually learning new attacks from the masters you've been sparring with. When you complete the training with a master, you unlock their fighting style, which doesn't really change how you fight mechanically, but does change your character's fighting animations. An excellent system trapped in a terrible game. You can utilize a scouter to find hidden items on the map while flying around. These items can be used to alter your hero's appearance, which is great because the customization that you start with is so limited that I was scared that this would be the end of it. You can go to the capsule house in the menu to rewatch cutscenes, read the character encyclopedia, modify your character's appearance, and watch replays. I'm not sure what kind of masochists want to rewatch fights though. This game is already so repetitive. It is also from here where you can see the Dragon Balls you've collected so far. Finding the Dragon Balls is actually the main goal in the hero mode. Yeah, I know, strange, a Dragon Ball game that actually cares about the Dragon Balls. I care about balls. The plot takes place several years after Dragon Ball GT, however it is unclear how long after. It is mentioned that both Goku and Gohan are no longer alive, implying that it has been quite a long time, but then you can train with both Goku and Gohan, but I think I'm just reading too much into it. The hero character is travelling the world training when he comes into possession of a Dragon Ball after defeating Captain Ginyu. Later he encounters androids 17 and 18 who remain evil in this timeline. I don't know what timeline this is. I don't know. Evil timeline. That's what it is. This fight is a team battle. Some confrontations in this game will allow you to switch between various characters. Each have their own separate health pool that is divided up evenly amongst the team. After defeating androids 17 and 18, the hero gains 2 additional Dragon Balls as well as the Dragon Radar. At this moment, the planet is in disarray. All of the cities have been destroyed and are constantly under attack. The hero learns about Piccolo, the reincarnation of King Piccolo, and tries to figure out if he is responsible for the current events on Earth. While fighting Piccolo, the hero transforms into a Super Saiyan. The same palette system that was used in the Raging Blast games is used for transforming, fusions, and switching. Most characters that can transform will have multiple to pick from, and you do not need to go chronologically through the forms. Ultimate Tenkaichi does go all the way up to Super Saiyan 4. However, no matter how much training the hero receives, he can only transform into a Super Saiyan. Piccolo informs him that a year ago someone assembled the 7 Dragon Balls and wished Ultimate Shenron to make Earth a living hell. Piccolo was attacked and injured by a great ape as he prepared to confront this individual. It is actually Baby in his golden ape form that attacked Piccolo, even though Baby should be dead. Who cares? Aside from normal fights, there are also fights against giant characters. These play out quite a bit differently than the usual fights, which I'd say is a godsend for such a repetitive game, but even these fights end up being monotonous. Monotonous! The word of the day, monotonous! For whatever reason, when fighting a giant, characters forget how to fly, so you're just stuck on the ground shooting them with weak-ass ki blasts. Because your character cannot walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, you must be careful to not be firing ki blasts when the giant attacks. I'm not sure what's up with the controls during these fights, but they are as rigid as hell. There is a significant lag between your character firing a ki blast and then evading. Even though there is a huge wind-up animation for the enemy's attacks, sometimes the game just won't let your character move. It's quite aggravating. After reducing the enemy's health to a certain amount, it moves to the QTE section, which is about as entertaining as any QTE boss, which is not at all. These portions can be cheated by pausing and checking the buttons you need to press. I only had to do this because the buttons in these fights were so unresponsive. I'm not sure why the input lag is so awful. It's not this bad during normal fights. If you couldn't already tell, I did not like these fights, like at all. Omega Shenron, it turns out, was the mastermind behind everything. So the hero goes to confront him but loses, and all of the Dragon Balls collected thus far are scattered once more. They aren't even attempting to conceal the fact that they are padding this out. So the hero must fight some more to reclaim the Dragon Balls, and then face Omega Shenron again to reclaim the final Dragon Ball. It's great to see that the hero mode is sticking to the theme of being repetitive and boring, so at least it's been consistent. The final fight would have been pretty awesome as the hero has to fight Ultimate Shenron, but it consists of a whole bunch of annoying quick-time events. Once Shenron is defeated, the hero's wish for all those killed during the chaos is granted. The end. Hero mode has some excellent ideas, such as being able to train under masters to learn their skills and customizing your own character's moves and stats. However, they did not go far enough with it. There needs to be more options at the beginning, as by the time you can really customize to your liking, the game is over. The gameplay just drags everything down. Unfortunately, the hero mode is an awesome concept trapped in a terrible game. Overall, I'd have to give Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Tenkaichi a rating of B, and not a B for bad, because it is something far worse than being bad. No, Ultimate Tenkaichi gets a B for boring.